Family Matters. To learn more about the Center for Family Care, please visit family.goarch.org. That's family.goarch.org. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
It's time now for Stewardship Calling with your host, Bill Marianis. Bill is a stewardship evangelist whose Stewardship Calling ministry is focused on helping people, parishes, and Christian organizations discover and live their stewardship callings and embrace true stewardship and generosity so that they may have a good account before the awesome judgment seat of Christ. Here's Bill.
I don't want to do this program. I hate that I'm doing it. I don't know what I was thinking, but I never thought I would live to see the day that this program would be necessary. But here we are. Don't get me wrong. I'm very honored, actually beyond belief, to have the right to do this interview that I'm going to do tonight. But I don't like what it means. I kind of feel like a friend who lives elsewhere with whom I feel very close, but is now departing from my life. Have any of you ever felt that? Have you ever been put in a situation that you feel like you are essentially, in a way, saying goodbye when you don't want to? Well, that's me tonight. Now, to be fair, the guy I'm saying goodbye to hoodwinked me. He tricked me. He suckered me in. And he did so several times without any regret. I can't even remember how he first tricked me. I know he and I spoke, but I don't remember what he said. Next thing I knew, I was driving 35 minutes each way the Sunday night of any month that had a fifth Sunday to my priest's house. Once there, Father Barnabas Powell and I would start to talk about critical topics affecting Orthodox churches, ministries, and peoples. Now, I was told by this guy that I'm interviewing tonight that my discussions with my priest and some other guests that I would occasionally hoodwink to join us was going out over the air, live, on a storied voice of the Orthodoxy platform called Ancient Faith Radio. What an odd name. I told him no one uses radios anymore. He already knew that. But I bought into that malarkey that night, the guest told me. And dutifully, 4 times a year on any fifth Sunday, I did this program we call Stewardship Calling, named after the ministry of the same name. I also don't remember the second conversation when he flim-flammed me. But next thing I know, I had agreed to also do a program every month on the first Wednesday. Now, anyone with even a rudimentary understanding of a calendar would realize the folly in such a thing. Because you see, the first Wednesday follows a fifth Sunday by 3 days. Every time. That's in essence 2 live shows in a week. And for each program, I generally try to spend a couple of days of doing research and writing notes and outlines for every program and recruiting guests. Now, how stupid do you have to be to agree to do that without an assistant? And how treacherous, a cunning convincer do you have to be to trick someone into such a commitment? But that is who I interview tonight. And he did all that with no remorse. Look, I negotiated for a living for over 40 years. I took on some of the best lawyers from some of the other big global law firms every day and held my own. But this guy tonight, I can't explain it. You just can't say no to him. He was that kind of personality and had that kind of persuasive gifts. And before I knew it, he had commandeered one of the bedrooms in our house at Lake Lanier, and he and Tanya came down to Gainesville, Georgia to wire up a studio with a connection to his main broadcast facility in Chesterton, Indiana. How does someone convince a person to give up a bedroom for a radio studio that's not even on radio? He is a slick and cunning operator. Now, Orthodox lore credits St. John Chrysostom as being the golden tongue, and far be it from me to rescind the title given to an Orthodox saint. But I will declare that the guy I'm talking to tonight is the platinum tongue. He's that good. Now, he's way too humble to admit to any of what I've said, but I'm a lawyer, so you can trust me. Okay, how about I'm an Orthodox stewardship calling evangelist, you can trust me. Either way, I swear that what I'm telling you is the truth and the absolute truth about platinum tongue gentleman John. Today we hear from a legend, not a fake legend the modern media likes to promote, but the real deal, the big kahuna. Today you'll hear from one of the founders and chief visionary of Ancient Faith Ministry organization and all that it has become. And what an amazing visionary he is. No one, and I mean no one, could have seen what he saw in putting this global voice of orthodoxy ministry together. Indeed, I often wonder what the world does look like wherever John Maddex's head is. If John were a college football coach, he'd be compared to the legendary Bear Bryant or Nick Saban. If he was a basketball coach, we'd compare him to John Wooden or Gino Auriemma or Phil Jackson. If he were a president, he'd be right up there with George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, which gets me to thinking maybe we ought to erect a statue of Gentleman John on the Washington Mall. But if he were a corporate CEO, he'd be a Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or Bill Gates. Or if he were a mobster, he'd be on the same plane with Al Capone or Don Vito Corleone. I could go on, but you get the picture. John Maddex is a really big deal that you may have never heard much about. Well, tonight that all changes. I intend to cross-examine him and expose the man behind the myth, or more accurately, the man behind the microphone soundboard. I actually Googled how to say goodbye to a visionary leader and legend. And the first entry just said, don't. There was another visionary that completely changed all of our lives by addicting us to handheld devices made of microchips and plastics. Steve Jobs, who founded Apple Computers, once famously said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And I'm here to tell you that John Maddex is that crazy. And he's been that successful at changing the world with the ministry that old platinum-tongued Gentleman John started. Imagine being responsible for a global beacon of the light of the world in orthodoxy in an otherwise very dark world. And unless you think I'm exaggerating, as anyone who broadcasts on Ancient Faith Radio platform can attest, every month station manager Bobby Maddex, John's son, sends us the data of where people tuned in. And I was looking at the data of where people tuned into my humble stewardship calling offering. Now, I'm not a total idiot. I know that my stewardship calling ministry to help people in parishes discover and live their stewardship callings is nowhere near as valuable to most people as Dr. Constantinos' Search the Scriptures program that explains the Holy Gospel, or Father Evan's Orthodoxy Today program that answers questions about orthodoxy, or Live with the Lows that brings together the best of orthodoxy and psychology. And yet, in the latest AFR research report that I got, I found out that among many other listeners from all over the globe, 4 people tuned in from Iran to the stewardship calling programs. Now, let that soak in for a second. Yeah, I said 4 people from Iran heard this program last month. That's the reach of Ancient Faith Radio that old platinum-tongued Gentleman John started. Now, these brave souls in Iran could be killed for listening to this kind of Christian content. But such is the global reach of Ancient Faith Ministries. And this doesn't even begin to count all the people who read the AFM blogs or listen to the AFR podcasts or read the tons of books that AFM publishes. I can assure you that behind all that effort of programs, podcasts, books, media, and other things, every one of us got hoodwinked, got tricked, got connived by the very same old platinum-tongued Gentleman John. I think he used the same stealth trick to convince us all to follow him. Yeah, see, he pulled up the big gun, and he said he was doing this for Jesus. Now, how can you say no to a warrior for Christ? I think he kind of learned that trick back in his evangelical days before he became Orthodox. Frankly, a Euro sandwich or pierogi to do a live program would probably have been all I needed to convince me, but that was not enough for old platinum-tongued Gentleman John. He had to throw in Jesus and tell us we needed to help him be a part of the global voice of orthodoxy that AFM has become. So we all signed up and followed him. In many respects, his pitch and the results that he was able to produce were somewhat similar to what our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ did when he recruited his disciples. See, he promised a different world if they followed him and did what he said, and then he delivered. Now, let me be clear. I know that John is no deity. At least I don't think he is. Man, if John is a deity, I will really regret this opening. But either way, he knew that he was changing the world one listener or reader at a time. And so he constantly recruited. I'm reminded of a quote from my favorite leadership scholars, Kouzes and Posner, who said, quote, "If you think you are a leader, and you turn around and no one is following you, then you're simply out for a walk, end quote. Well, John Maddex certainly was not on a walk alone. He was a disciple maker extraordinaire. And more importantly than us worker bees whom he recruited are the people that have been reached by the Ancient Faith Ministries. The people who have found orthodoxy because of Ancient Faith Ministries. The people who found Christ because of Ancient Faith Ministries. The people who found hope or joy or love or laughter or useful information, all because of Ancient Faith Ministries. All these people's lives are better because old platinum-tongued gentleman John Maddex decided that he would be the current day John the Baptist and get lots of people to help pass along the message of Christ's importance. And not just any message. Nope. Old platinum-tongued gentleman John was getting us to, in our own kind of separate and unique ways, help people repent and get closer to Christ before he comes back for another really important visit. You see, old platinum-tongued gentleman John was laser focused on spreading the Orthodox faith and the gospel of Jesus Christ. He didn't care who you were, how many sins you had notched on your belt, what the faith of your youth was, or where your people immigrated from. Old platinum-tongued gentleman John was singularly focused on helping you and other disciples get closer to Christ. That's what he thought about every day when he woke up and every night when he went to bed. That's what the greatest leaders do. They stay laser focused on their future vision. I end every Stewardship Calling show with a quote attributed to Mark Twain, although I'm not really sure he was the original author. But whether or not old Samuel Clemens said this or not, the wisdom is great. 2 of the most important days of your life are, first, the day you were born, and second, the day you figure out why. There's no question that old platinum-tongued gentleman John knows exactly why he is here. Every presentation I do and every program I offer and everyone I speak with, I always ask the why question. It's why so many have given me the nickname of the Orthodox why guy. Not wise guy, but why guy. But see, I never asked it of John Maddex. He shared his why with me at the outset of our relationship, and I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. And now 7 years later, here I am doing the most important interview of my Ancient Faith Radio life and hating every minute of doing it. Don't get me wrong. I don't hate talking with old platinum-tongued gentleman John. That's actually one of my favorite things I never get to do often enough. I just hate what this interview means about his role at Ancient Faith Ministry. And also, don't get me wrong, I'm happy for him and his life partner Tanya. I'm happy that they'll get some much-needed time off. But I don't have to like saying goodbye to him. Heck, I even tried to recruit him to come work for me in my Stewardship Calling ministry. That was one of the few times he actually laughed to me in my face. Okay, I get that would be a step down for a champion and gentleman and true unadulterated visionary. So here we are, folks. If you tuned in to hear what the light of Orthodox Christianity looks like, if you tuned in to hear a platinum-tongued faithful disciple of Jesus Christ, or if you tuned in to learn from the best of the best about how to organize a world-class organization and how to recruit disciples, then you've tuned in to the right program. Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to Stewardship Calling and in this first Wednesday series on Ancient Faith Radio. This is Bill Marianis from stewardshipcalling.com, coming to you live from the shores of beautiful Lake Lanier in Gainesville, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. And I have a simple premise that you, every one of you, have been called by your Creator to a personal calling, a reason to your life and a reason for your life, something you need to do with all of the gifts over which God has made you a steward. It's what I call your stewardship calling. And St. Paul makes this crystal clear over and over again in letters to the Ephesians and others. But the one I always cite to is basically Ephesians 4:1, where he states, I beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called. As I mentioned before, until 2017, by day I was blessed to be a partner in 2 great international law firms of 1,100 lawyers each, where I was both a partner and served in management, had an opportunity to work with some of the best and brightest individuals and corporate people, but none of whom could even remotely come close to the gentleman, John, that I'm going to regrettably hate doing everything moment about interviewing. I can't even talk anymore. I'm so upset about this. You see, my stewardship calling is to help people in parishes discover and live their stewardship callings, and that's exactly what John Maddex has done with me and everyone else. Now, I've put it off long enough, so it's time to take my medicine, since I asked for it, and speak with old platinum-tongued gentleman John. But first, I have to formally introduce him to all of you. See, I asked Mr. Amazing for a bio, and here's what he sent me in all of his truthful humility and transparency. So I'm going to quote it exactly. John Maddex is the CEO of Ancient Faith Ministries, a publishing and radio outreach operating both Ancient Faith Radio and Ancient Faith Publishing. He has 50-plus years experience in broadcasting, having served at the Moody Bible Institute and Focus on the Family. He was responsible for Moody's 35 owned and operated radio stations for much of that time. John has served on the board of the Fellowship of St. James, who publishes Touchstone and Salvo magazines, as well as the National Religious Broadcasters. He and his wife, Tanya, live in Chesterton, Indiana, and have 2 adult children and 8 grandchildren. And he says that he knows it's not much because he don't want to talk about and doesn't have any real college credentials that he wants to brag about. But what he also says is that he grew up in a radio home. Here's what he said. He said, my dad worked for Moody Radio from 1954 to 1965. And I was a child singer-actor on the KYB, that's the Know Your Bible Club, a popular Sunday afternoon live show on WMBI in Chicago. He said, I was 5 years old when that started, and there's tapes somewhere. We've got to find those tapes. But in the absence of those tapes, I'm going to ask Gentleman John to sing and act on the program today, I think. He also says, quote, I started working in radio part-time as a teenager. Joined the Air National Guard right out of high school, worked at the International Harvester Truck Assembly Plant until he got married in June of 1969. I started working full-time in radio the same month we got married. This would have been at WEEC in Springfield, Ohio, the independent Christian radio station my dad managed after he left Moody. By the time I was 23, we accepted a job offer to work for Moody at their Cleveland station as a staff announcer. Bobby was 2 years old at the time. Molly came along a year later. Born in Akron, I was promoted to assistant station manager in 1976 and station manager in 1979 at the ripe old age of 29. John goes on to add, he says, quote, as Moody added more radio stations, they needed someone to oversee all of them. So they moved me to headquarters in Chicago to be the director of broadcast stations in 1982. Moody had 7 stations at that time. He later says, I left Moody for 3 years from 1986 to 1989 to accept an offer to work in the broadcast division of Focus on the Family in Southern California. It was a good experience, and Bobby and Molly loved living there, but we discovered we had too much mid-American blood in our veins. So when Moody called to ask if I would consider coming back, we jumped at the chance. From 1989 to 2007, I worked in downtown Chicago at Moody, and the number of radio stations I looked over grew to 35. While the flagship station, WMBI, was in between station managers, I appointed myself interim station manager while I looked for a replacement. We sadly lost our beloved VP of Broadcasting, Bob Neff, in 2006, and in the interim between his repose and my departure from Moody, I served as the acting VP of Broadcasting. He ends by saying, my time at Moody came to an end in 2007, where we can pick up the story of Ancient Faith Radio. Folks, if this is not the American dream, if this is not an exemplary life of a disciple of Jesus Christ personified, then I don't know what it is. But here we are. So let's get it on. Okay, old platinum-tongued gentleman John Maddex, finally, welcome to Stewardship Calling Live on the platform that you built.
Oh, my goodness, Bill. My wife is rolling on the floor laughing right now, I'm sure, saying, I know him. He ate all that. That's for sure.
So, wait, is Tanya confirming that you're not a deity and therefore I don't have to regret this introduction?
Oh, yes. She will confirm that in spades.
I mean, because I kind of wonder sometimes whether you are a deity and whatnot. I've seen you pull more than a few magic tricks along of our journey together, and we've been able to do some things. Okay, so I want to get started, as I always do, because one of the things that I've learned in life is that there's always so much more to a person than their bio and their resume and their CV. So as I always say, I want you to start from the time you entered this glorious kingdom of life to the present and tell us more about you in the early days of little Johnny Maddex.
Wow. Well, we have to go back to my year of birth, which was 1950. So feel free to do the math. I'll wait.
That's why I said old platinum tongue.
Old is right.
But you're just a few years older than me, but I'm just going to keep reminding you of that.
Born in Urbana, Ohio, which is
Where's Urbana,
southwest Ohio between Columbus and Dayton.
Okay.
Mechanicsburg.
Well, it's not too far from where my wife's from. She's from Circleville, Ohio.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Not too far.
So you probably went to the pumpkin show. Okay.
At
So you're a
Mechanicsburg,
Buckeye.
Ohio is where we lived. The hospital is in Urbana, just 4 or 5 miles down the road.
Okay.
But Buckeye, my dad worked in Mechanicsburg, Ohio as
Sure.
a watch repairman at Shedder's Jewelry right there on the main drive, which not a long drive, but
Now, for all the millennials and Gen Xers and Zs living, a wristwatch was something you used to put on your wrist that told time.
You remember.
So
Had little moving parts, little dials that went around.
Yeah.
It was kind of
So
cool.
you actually had to have a human being replace it. You just didn't throw it away and start over again.
Yes. And so he found Christ while I was just a very young baby, around a year or 2 years old. He and my mom both became Christians, and they started going to church. And he had technical experience and some radio experience, and he said, I really want to use my experience in radio and technology for the Lord. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but did you ever hear the story of how it was that he found his faith?
I did. Okay. It was my aunt and uncle. My aunt and uncle, Uncle Stanley and Aunt Miriam, were devout Christians, and they witnessed to my mom and dad, and they prayed the prayer, as they say. Those of you who are evangelicals will know what I mean by the prayer.
And you can say amen anytime you want to.
Anytime. Right. And but they had a genuine conversion to Jesus Christ, which literally changed their lives.
And yours.
And mine, yeah. And so in 1954, he got a job at the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago as a studio engineer. And so age 4, we were attending the Addison Street Baptist Church in Chicago. And every Sunday afternoon, I would say actually every other Sunday afternoon, after church, after lunch, we would head down to the studios of the Moody Bible Institute. And at 2 o'clock, Aunt Teresa Warman, the mic would open, and she said, hello, boys and girls. It's the KYB Club. And then the kids would start singing, and I was in the choir, my brother, my sister, and we would do skits, and we would sing. They had a little family that was called the Bangle family. And the skit was at the Bangle's house.
Okay.
And I played the role of Joey Bangle at the age of about 6, who was the youngest of the kids. And my dad played the role of the father, and my brother was in it. And so we would
This is incredible. You really haven't lived in a parallel universe.
Oh, we would do a live show at 2, and then we would stay and record a second show for the following week. Wow. And I can still remember there in Studio B of the 10th floor, or no, sorry, the 11th floor of Moody. Historic studios, by the way. Studios that really go back to the late 20s.
The original kinds of studios.
Moody was one of the first, if not the first, Christian radio station on the air, WMBI in Chicago.
Right.
But they were also one of the first radio stations. Going back to the 20s, radio was in its infancy. Yeah. And so Moody was a pioneer. And I can remember hearing about the president of Moody at that time, a man by the name of Dr. James M. Gray, back in the 20s. They tell the story that he got a lot of criticism for using radio because who is the prince of the power of the air anyway? It's Satan. And so you can't use this technology for the gospel. It's evil. And he was a pioneer.
Yeah.
He said, no, we will use what has been created maybe for evil. We will use it for good to spread the gospel. And the rest
Boy,
is
have you
history.
done that in spades with Ancient Faith Ministries, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Well, yeah, but it's a model that I've never forgotten. Because it's a model that was consistent at Moody. Yes, I'm no longer there. Yes, my faith tradition has dramatically changed, and I am now an Orthodox Christian, and very glad that I am. But the formation of my spiritual life was very carefully developed in those years, growing up as a child, hanging around the Moody Bible Institute and the studios of WMBI. And I have such fond memories of that. And
well, that's interesting, because most people that were guilty of child labor law, the children don't always remember them fondly, but I can imagine you were having a lot of fun doing some of the things you were doing.
Oh, really did. I really did. And here's the funny thing, not funny, but it's just amazing to me. One of my dad's colleagues at the Moody Bible Institute in the radio division was an engineer by the name of Pete Van Milligan. I can remember Pete. I can remember what he looked like. He was Dutch Reformed, as you can imagine, from the Holland, Lansing area of Chicago. You know it well.
Absolutely.
Well, now spin forward to 2020, when we needed an engineer here at Ancient Faith Radio. I found out that the cousin of one of our fellow parishioners at St. Elizabeth Orthodox Church here in Chesterton, Norma Vukovic, her cousin was John, you guessed it, Van Milligan.
No.
We found out that our fathers worked together at Moody.
Oh, man, that's impressive. That is God's hand.
And you heard John's voice just before the show, helping us get the studio set up. Yeah. So, John and I talk about, were you at this staff picnic at the transmitter site? I was there. I said, do you remember the clown that was playing with the kids? Yeah, I remember that clown. That was my dad.
Oh, my gosh. Have you found any pictures of those days? Y'all need to dig around in the Moody archives there.
I wish. I don't. There is one picture that I bet I could find if I really scrounged hard enough of the cast of the KYB club sitting around a microphone with Aunt Teresa right in the middle of us. I'm there, my brother's there, my sister's there. I think I was about 7 at the time, my brother 10, and my sister 4.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Did you have like a script or anything? Like, I mean, controlling a 4, a 7, and a 10-year-old is not easy in any context. But I mean, what did they do? What did they give you to actually perform or whatnot?
Yeah, well, there was a script, and they had script writers. I mean, this is back in the day of live radio. Yeah. Moody Radio was a pioneer in radio drama. Mm-hmm. And some of their radio drama, I'll bet some of our listeners who are older will remember the likes of Sailor Sam and Ranger Bill, Warrior of the Woodland. And so, they had a script. And we would rehearse about a half hour before the show, and then we would go live, and it would just go through in real time. And
it was live radio. I mean,
it was live radio.
I mean, all mistakes, were all intentional.
Yep, all there, and out there for everyone to hear. No editing at that point. So I really do have wonderful memories of that. And my dad worked at Moody from 1954 to 1965. So again, do the math. I was 15 when he was given the opportunity to manage his own station in Springfield, Ohio, which was close to where I was born and where he worked at, close by back in the day. And so in 1965, we picked up and moved to Springfield, Ohio, and became members of the Blessed Hope Baptist Church. And I joined the youth group.
I can picture it. You don't need to. I mean, I can just picture what that looks like.
Yep.
Blessed Hope Baptist Church.
Yep. Okay. Oh, yeah. Everything you can imagine.
Yeah.
In the best possible way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those were days, the young listeners may not remember this, but those were days in which the churches, and it doesn't matter the denomination, all the churches were truly family churches, and everybody knew each other. Everybody was in everybody's business. Everybody ate together and played together and did stuff together.
Potlucks.
I mean, it was exactly. I mean, it was the kind of community that truthfully many of us long for, not just because we're old and we always look back and long for it, but because it really did create a sense of of care and lovingness that extended beyond your genetic family.
Yeah, and a very active youth group. We had probably 15 or 20 kids, high school kids in the youth group.
Yeah.
And one of them was especially good looking. And it was a young lady by the name of Tanya Schrader.
Wait a minute. You were actually stealing your spouse from a church youth group?
Oh, yeah. That's what church youth groups are intended for.
Yeah, that's what they were intended for. You're right.
Exactly.
Oh, what a story.
Yeah.
I never knew how y'all met. That's amazing.
Yeah. We were at so this is going to be a throwback term for some of our listeners. We were at a singspiration.
A singspiration?
You heard me right.
Oh, yes.
This is on a Sunday night, usually around in someone's home, where we would sing choruses, drink Pepsi and potato chips, and try to sit next to the girls we liked. And so,
all under the guise of faith, right?
Yes, exactly. And so this was in the fall of 1966. I was 16.
Okay. Wait, 16 years old.
Yep.
You already had your eyes on her.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, there we go.
And so the hayride was coming up. And
of course. Now, you have to describe for the listeners that are younger what a hayride is.
All right. For Midwesterners, you'll know exactly what it is. But our youth group would every fall have a fall hayride where one of the farmers in our church would hitch up a wagon, fill it with hay, and then we would go through his corn fields and around the countryside in a hay wagon. And we would all be in the wagon, sitting on bales of hay, hopefully next to the girl you had in mind, with hands occasionally touching. I'm just telling you.
Yeah. So there was a lot of maneuvering on the boarding of the hay wagon. There,
well, strategy
right?
first.
absolutely.
Strategy, then maneuvering. So, but how we got to the hayride together was at this singspiration. I'm talking to this Tanya for the first time, and I'm a little nervous, and I didn't know what else to say. So I said, "Oh, so hayride's coming up. Are you going?" And she said, "Well, are you asking me?"
Ooh.
I said, "I like this woman.
Yeah, she's good.
She's making it easy."
Like, well, it could have gone badly. Like if you said yes, and she goes, "Well, I'm not going with you." Then I'm going. I'm not going.
Right.
So there was a certain risk on both parts there.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was.
Oh yeah, but I can remember it well, and so we just we started dating, and as kids did back then,
right?
And hanging out together. I finally got my driver's license, and we were able to see each other a little bit more. And then it all went south when she turned 18. Suddenly she had
I feel like we should have some music in the old radio hour, like dun dun dun.
Music would be appropriate.
Right.
Because
so what happened at age 18?
At age 18, she decided she needed to find herself.
Oh, come on. She found you. What else is there?
I know. That's what I said. That's what I said.
Okay. Yeah.
So she said, I don't know what I want.
Well, welcome to being 18.
Oh,
that's kind of like par for the course.
Yeah, and she's a year older. I was 17, and
wait, you were dating an older woman?
I was.
Oh my gosh.
I was.
Usually people can bend when they're stealing from the cradle, but you were going up in age.
Going up.
That. Okay.
Yeah, and marrying up, I might say too. And so
I didn't want to say that, but I'm glad you did.
Well, we all know.
True.
We all know.
Yeah.
And so we were apart for about 6 months. And
where was she finding herself? Can you disclose that? Or
you know what? She had just graduated from high school.
Right.
So she was attending Cedarville College, which was nearby college in the Baptist church, and really just kind of exploring other friends and other boys, and apparently not at all happy with them, and decided that she needed to get back with Mr. John. So there you have it. I mean, in the parking lot of the church, she said, "Well, I think I made a mistake."
Oh, really? She confessed to it?
She did. She did.
Well, that was bad negotiating on her part, because now you had her at that point, right?
Yeah. Well, and
at the ripe old age of 17 and 18, I mean, it was a done deal.
Well, and here's a 17-year-old kid who also just graduated from high school. I graduated a year earlier than most kids.
Yeah.
And I was about ready to head off to basic training for the Air National Guard. At age 17, I was in and out of basic training and schooling for the Air Force before my 18th birthday. And came back at age, and so we got back together just before I shipped off to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, and a little bit later on to Lowry Air Force Base for my training in Denver. Mm-hmm. And so we kept up a correspondence. And of course, back then, there was no cell phones, no texting, it was letters.
There was no internet. There were no emails.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Occasionally we could call, but calling privileges were few and far between. Yeah.
And so she comes back after having decided that she made a mistake, and you leave.
Yeah.
Good. That was good timing.
Well, I'll tell you, you hear that absence makes the heart grow fonder. This was truly the case for both of us. Wow, we realized that we really did not want to be apart.
Yeah.
And so I got back in March of 1968, just ahead of my 18th birthday. And so I started working at that time at the International Harvester full-time. It was the local assembly plant. Everybody worked at the International. And so they had two plants. They had an assembly plant and a machine plant. I worked on the line as an inspector, which basically meant I checked boxes on a piece of paper as the trucks went by. Mm-hmm. And she was working at a local grocery store, checking people out with their groceries. And we just, kept dating and looking for where do we want to serve. Mm-hmm. I had started working part-time at WEEC. The announcers at the station took me under their wing, and I would go there in the evenings, and they would let me cue up the records, up the tapes, and transfer programs. And I just got a bug for radio. I can remember just loving being in the studio, spinning the records, transitioning from one platter to the other. They would let me go on the air and give the station break and move on to the next show.
Call signs at set time periods
And so my dad at that point was the president of the organization. They had some other ministries, and there was a station manager that was not my dad. And my dad had a policy, unlike our policy at Ancient Faith, of not being involved in any nepotism. So he would not hire me. But the station manager who did run the station said to my dad, I want your son. I want your son to work on the weekends.
Yeah.
And so I was hired part-time for the weekends while I worked full-time during the week at the International Harvester.
Oh, wow.
And Tanya would come and sit with me in the studio, and there was a pizza place like 6 doors down in the strip mall that the station was in, and she'd go down and get us a pizza and bring it back, and we'd eat the pizza together. And those are just really great memories of being in radio, being on the air, having my lady there with me, and eating pizza together, and just enjoying life.
Well, you were a rock star. I mean, to be on the radio is not it was a big deal at that time. It was a really big deal. And so, for her to be hanging out with you, that was kind of a good thing. That kind of gave her a little bit of panache, so.
Well, so.
And I assume, by the way, I assume both your parents and stuff like that were okay with this. And
they loved Tanya. What's not to love? I mean, they just fell in love with her, and it was very supportive of the relationship. And somehow I hoodwinked her parents to like me, and so we made it work.
Oh, platinum tongue, even back then, huh?
Yeah. So keep in mind, this is 1968 in December now. It's getting close to Christmas, and you wouldn't hear this so often these days, but my mind was thinking of marriage at age 18.
Wow. That's absolutely not what you hear nowadays.
And so I bought a ring.
Ooh.
And
you bold move.
On December 18th, 1968, I pulled into her driveway to pick her up so that our youth group and young adults at that point was going to a nursing home to sing carols.
Oh, how beautiful. Yeah.
And so I had the ring with me. With my lucrative full-time work at the International Harvester, I was driving a brand new 1968 Ford Mustang.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
Oh, I love that car.
You had a Mustang, new Mustang?
I had a V8 289 Mustang.
Listen, folks, if those of you that don't know what we're talking about, if you have never seen that vehicle in those days, you are missing truly a work of God. I mean, that was cool. You were mega cool. Now you're on the radio and you're driving a Stang.
Yep.
I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yep. And so I picked her up. We got in the car, and you talk about no romantic planning whatsoever. I basically said, Tanya, will you marry me? And
in the car?
In the car.
Not on your knee?
No.
Not music playing in the background?
No.
You got to be kidding me.
18.
You had access to a radio studio where you could have staged a mega production, and you just kind of casually say, like, we're going to go through the drive-thru. Do you want a Coke and you want to get married?
One of the many desires for do-overs in my life. And,
I love do-overs.
Yeah. And so she said, of course I will. We're going to be late. Come on.
So she was like, yeah, it's a done deal. Let's go.
Well, she didn't know I had a ring. And
okay.
I said, no, I'm serious. Will you marry me? And I pulled the ring out, showed it to her, and of course she started bawling.
Yeah.
Ran into the house to show her mom and dad, and couldn't wait to get back in the car and head to the nursing home so she could show off the ring to all of her friends. So she was.
Wait, did she ever say yes, or did she just get excited about the ring?
She did. She yelled it out.
Okay, I didn't know. I don't know if we have to go back and replay this marriage because I'm not sure if it's properly valid.
She was 19. I was 18.
Yeah.
We were engaged December 1968, June 7th, 1969. I'm now 19. She's now 20. We were married at that Blessed Hope Baptist Church.
Wow.
And I started working the week after our honeymoon. I started working full-time at WEEC in Springfield.
Yeah.
I was the morning drive newsman.
Oh, very important. Very important role.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that very much was.
Yep. And I covered, as a part-timer, I covered the 1968 elections.
Oh, gosh. And again,
think about
for those people that don't know what we're talking about, go back and look at what happened during the 1968 elections, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, the riots. And I mean, you need to go back and look at that in history. That was one of those unique moments in time.
Yeah, and we did not have a network news service. So we had a UPI teletype machine.
Yep.
And it was rip and read. I mean, you basically got the yellow roll and the paper came out, and I can still hear the clacking of the teletype in my ears and the smell of that paper, and rip it, quickly read it and mark it up, and then go on the air.
You go on the air.
I went then to one of the county's precincts and covered the local election from the precinct in Champaign County.
Okay.
Clark County was the other major county, and so we had people in both counties giving reports.
And you were just kind of like watching and observing what was happening?
Watching, observing, interviewing, people as they came out of the booth. I mean, it was journalism. And
back in the day when it was real journalism.
Yeah, real, but also amateur at the same time. We were not pros, but
but you were telling the facts.
Telling the facts.
You didn't need to be a pro. You're just telling a story that was right in front of you. You weren't trying to make an agenda happen.
No, and we weren't trying to project winners or anything. We were just saying, here's the numbers.
Yeah.
So yes, and that experience also just got in my blood, and I said, I love this so much. And so when I was offered a full-time position, I jumped at it to do the morning news and to be on the air. So I'd do morning news. The show would start at 6 a.m. and go until 8. And then I would work as the staff announcer from 8 until 2, and then, got off early. But then they switched me to the graveyard shift. I worked midnight to 6, 6 days a week.
Oh, yeah.
That about killed me.
Oh, yeah.
And so, age...
one funny, can I
yeah,
for
please.
one funny story? So I kind of, as you know, I grew up not far from Chesterton in the steel mill town of East Chicago, Indiana.
Yeah.
What we used to call Gary's Ghetto. But anyway, and I never forget, I used to have to take a school bus to the school that I went to because there were some accreditation issues going on at that time. Anyway, so I'm sitting out in front of my bus stop, and there's a bar behind me in East Chicago, and it's full up in 6 o'clock in the morning. You can't get in there. I'm thinking, what is wrong with the people in this city that they're drinking? Until I worked my first graveyard shift at Inland Steel, and I realized that's when you're coming off work. Of course, you're going to get
this is their happy hour.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, now all of a sudden, I years later, there I am coming out of the steel mill, sitting at that same bar, looking at these poor kids in the school bus. So I understand. Now, why did you shift to the graveyard shift? Because that's tough duty.
Yeah. The former overnight announcer, Bob Teal was his name, retired.
Okay.
And he was a pastor. He was one of the most holy spiritual men I've ever met.
Wow.
And he had a pastoral ministry during those overnight hours. That's legendary.
Yeah.
And so people loved him. And when he retired, they had to replace him. And I got the short stick because I was the newest staff member.
Yeah, of course.
And I went overnight. So parenthetically, I loved sports. I loved baseball. I loved softball. I loved basketball. And I would play basketball.
You're in the right markets for that, huh?
I played basketball with friends almost 3 times a week. I was in a softball league, recreational softball league, and my long-suffering wife went with me to games. I was on 3 teams.
My gosh.
We played 3 nights a week. And after Bobby was born, we'd drag him along to the game as well. And so
you were a jock.
I love sports, and I even today, if I can get out and shoot a hoop, I love doing that.
That's awesome.
So we played basketball in the afternoon till about 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, and I just wore myself out. I mean, I was so tired, and I had to be at work at midnight.
Right.
And so I got into work and I started my shift, and there was a program that many of our listeners, again, from the old days will remember. It's Dr. J. Vernon McGee. It's called Through the Bible. And this was a half-hour daily Bible study program. It started at 2 a.m. every morning, and then they played it again later that day. So here's old sleepy, tired John who just got off the basketball court, started the show, and I made the mistake of just laying my head down on the table.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
All right. Half-hour show.
Yep.
Spin forward an hour and a half.
There's dead air.
I wake up to see the reel flapping on the other side. Like it just ran off the feeder reel, and it's just spinning around. All 4 lights are blinking of the phone.
You knew that there was trouble there.
Oh,
the dead air is never a good thing.
But I was out cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I learned that the graveyard shift is not for me. And so I just looked forward to the day when I didn't have to do that anymore. And about a year later, I worked that shift for a year. And then I did get an opportunity to move to daytime. And eventually I was asked to become the assistant to the station manager. Not the assistant manager, but the assistant to the station manager, just helping him with administrative things. Sure. I was in charge of scheduling part-time announcers. And if someone couldn't come and make their shift, I had to fill it myself.
Yeah.
I usually had to work all holidays because our staff wanted the holidays off, but because I'm now, quote, in lower end management, you get off, but I'll work. And so I wasn't home for Christmas or Thanksgiving for probably 3 years during that period of my career.
Yikes.
And so I was still working at the radio station that my dad was the president of. And I always wondered, did I get this job because of him? Is that why I'm working here? He wouldn't hire me, but it's still the boss's son. So, we'll give him a job. I decided, and Tanya and I talked about this long and hard. I said, you know what? I'm going to start putting feelers out to see if a radio station would hire me just because of my skills.
Yeah.
And so I knew, of course, my dad had worked for Moody. I knew where their stations were. And so I wrote a letter to Dean Sipple. Dean was the station manager of WDLM, standing for Dwight Lyman Moody, in East Moline, Illinois, Quad Cities, Davenport, Rock Island, etc.
Yeah, it's got multiple states, multiple cities all around each other.
Cross right on the Mississippi. And so I got a letter back from Dean saying, we are not hiring right now, but our sister station in Cleveland is. I've taken the liberty of sending your letter off to Dick Florence, the station manager of WCRF in Cleveland. So I thought, well, that's interesting. We'll see if he reaches out. And he did. He called me and said, John, we are expanding. Right now we sign off at 11 p.m. every night. We're going to expand to 1 a.m., so 2 additional hours a day. But I also have other shifts that I need filled, and I've gotten approval from headquarters to hire a new full-timer. And I'd like to interview you. Would you and your wife come up to Cleveland and allow me to interview you? And so we did. We went up. We got my mom and dad to watch Bobby, and we drove up the 3 hours to WCRF. The studio still is in Brecksville, Ohio. And I know we have listeners who live right in the neighborhood of the studio. They're Ancient Faith listeners who I've gotten to know and love. And so they remember the station. They know the studio. And so Dick Florence interviewed us, and a week later sent us a letter making an offer to come work for WCRF as a staff announcer at the amazing salary of $650 a month.
Wow.
I know.
What are you going to do with all
money.
that? No wonder you're retiring
big
kind
money.
of now. You're so rich with all that $600 a month. Lord have mercy.
Yeah.
That's some people's cell phone bills now.
Yeah.
But that's another conversation. What did your dad say when you said, "Hey, listen, I'm leaving your station to go for this"? You weren't competing, but radio.
No, my dad was proud because he worked for Moody. And he knew that in terms of reputation in the Christian radio, genre,
ecosystem, sure.
Moody was number one.
Yeah.
Like if you got to Moody and worked for Moody, you were at the top. And so he was proud that his son was going to go to work for a Moody station. And so it was so exciting. And I still remember the feeling of going to my very first shift at WCRF, and I can even remember what I packed for lunch, and meeting the staff and starting my shift and getting trained by the staff there. A funny story about my working at WCRF. I'm working in the evening, and there was no other staff there. The evening announcer was there by himself or herself, and so I would lock up when I'd leave, and so. Also, it was a rip and read news operation, no network news. And so I was reading a story on the air live about the economy in Russia. And the story was about the Russian dollar, which we all know to be the ruble.
The ruble, yeah.
I didn't know that. I kept calling it the Russian ruble.
I was going to say, once you just said I didn't know that, I was thinking I knew exactly what you were going to say.
And
the Russian ruble. Okay, so that really ticked off the Russian community in that area.
Well, not only the Russian community, but the listeners, because the phone started ringing.
Okay.
After the newscast. Picked up the phone, Christian radio, WCRF. Would you tell that idiot that it's ruble and not rubble?
So you changed your voice and you said, I've already told him that fool, that young child.
No, I said, I'll see if I can find him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let him know. One of the very first things that I got to attend in my first year of working at WCRF was its 15th anniversary. It started 15 years before I had started. I couldn't believe it. This celebration was held at the Cleveland Auditorium, downtown Cleveland.
Oh, it was big time.
10,000 people came to this. The place was filled with WCRF listeners, and they were so supportive and so into the station. It really made you feel like you were involved in something worthwhile. Something really making a difference. And I'll have to say, those early days of radio and seeing the impact of Christian radio on people's hearts and lives, radio is such a personal medium, right? Everybody's got a radio back then. If you're either listening to it on your transistor or in your home or in your car, and it's very private. You are listening alone, and you are able to scan the dial back when they had dials, and listen to something, and it could be feeding you spiritually, but you didn't have to tell another soul that you were listening to this religious station and getting fed a spiritual diet. And the impact of radio, even more than television, was so stunning to me and so contagious in terms of my feel for missionary outreach and to use a tool like radio to evangelize. And it's something that I learned in my early days of radio, and I've just never let go of that. And, years later, a little later we'll tell the story of how Ancient Faith began, but one of the absolute driving motivations in starting Ancient Faith was evangelism and using a tool like internet radio, which not much internet radio back in 2004 back then.
Nope.
To use a tool like that to see people not only meet Christ in a new, fresh, vibrant way, but also realize he also has a church.
Yeah.
It's a visible, organic church. Yeah. It's not a spiritual, invisible church.
Yeah, it's not in the ether. It's
real.
To it. Yeah.
It's got people. It's got history. It's got bishops. It's got a legacy that goes all the way back to the disciples. And that's a story that I really wanted to help tell in some way, and we'll get to that.
But let me stop you. I mean, you heard the interview that I did essentially last month with your successor, your hand-chosen successor, Melinda, and in there I repeated what I often repeat is that famous commencement speech that Steve Jobs did at Stanford, where he said you can't connect the dots of your life looking forward, you can only connect them looking backward. And so we're seeing these points of inflection in Platinum Tongue's life here by virtue of having this experience, understanding the power back then of radio, recognizing that it was, while a new medium for Christianity, it was something that could be rebaptized, if you will, with a Christian phronym, as we say, a Christian orientation, and also recognizing that as opportunities presented themselves, there were ways in which you could spread Christ's message in a very powerful and impactful way that didn't require sitting across the table from somebody or sitting in the same room for them. And all of these things were so richly given to you let's be honest, very early on in your life.
Well, a gift. It was truly a gift. And speaking of a gift, I just have to say, I listened to every word of that interview last month that you did with Melinda. My wife, Tanya, and I sat next to each other on our couch, and we kept looking at each other and saying, thank God. Thank God for this woman who God has led to us to come in and get established with the Ancient Faith to the point where now she's ready to take the lead and the mantle. And I could not be more thrilled and more excited about the future with Melinda as the CEO than I am. It is a gift from God that she is here and she is ready and quite capable. So,
well, as I said in that interview, and I really meant it, and I'm not taking anything away from her, please understand very clearly, that is a testament to your leadership style, because not every leader would have the vision enough to say, I want to start planting some seeds with some successors. We all know examples of people that have leadership roles. They're not real leaders. They just have a title, but they have a title of leadership that is so basically insecure that they don't want to create a successor. They don't want to train anybody on it. And so, taking nothing away from Melinda's, from that interview, but it is a testament, John, to your leadership style and the fact that you would understand the importance of doing that, not only for your own peace of mind, but honestly to keep the incredible vision of Ancient Faith Ministries going on. Now, it's God's grace that He brought her to you and her journey, which, for those people that didn't listen, you really need to go back and listen to the October 30th program on Stewardship Calling, just to listen to her incredible story and journey towards not only to Ancient Faith Ministries, but to orthodoxy and her whole life from a religious, I won't name it, but from a religious tradition that I had honestly never heard of until she said it.
Oh, nor had I before I met her.
It was kind of like, what? I actually, you remember, I had to ask her, like, what is that again? Say that again.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a testament to God's grace and to the gift of the Holy Spirit.
That's for sure.
That these things would converge. But again, it's also to your credit partner. So
you're
I had to get that in. Okay. So you're now firmly entrenched in the media and the Christian media. You're seeing people coming together on that. You're seeing the power of that. And so, but you're still in Ohio.
Yep. So I was the staff announcer from 1973 to 1976 for 3 years. And I was asked to become the assistant station manager in 1976. We had an assistant manager who was doubling as the radio engineer, the technical guy.
Right.
And so he was wearing two hats, doing it, quite capably, but it's an impossible job to try to keep a full power station like that on the air and humming along, with everything working, but also helping to run the station with the station manager. And by the way, that gentleman who was the engineer and the assistant station manager just reposed last week, Jim Wagner, such a beautiful, beautiful man.
Yeah.
And so I was asked to become the assistant manager in 1976. And then in 1979, the station manager, Dick Florence, Dick and Sally, were asked by Moody to start a new 100,000 watt FM radio station in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Brand new station. Good power. Great and
amazing signal. And very strong station today, thanks to Dick's leadership. And so when he was sent down to Florida, Bob Neff, the vice president of broadcasting, called me and said, John, are you ready? We want to turn this station over to you. And I'm, 29 years old.
Amazing.
Way too young to be in that position. But because...
Yeah, but you'd been at it since you were 5 and 6 in one measure or another.
Yeah.
So, in all fairness, you really learned the business from the bottom up.
Well, and fortunately, I didn't have to go alone because, obviously, the headquarters in Chicago were very interested about what's happening at their number one outside station. WCRF just was huge in terms of listenership and support. And so they had their eye on me. And and I snagged my britches a few times, I remember. I know I did. Looking back, some things that were either decided or done, I can certainly see now that the youth did not serve me well in some of those decisions.
Yeah, but that's how we learn. Yep. So it's okay. It's all good.
It was so much learning and such a benefit. So it's 1982, 3 years later, as the stations had grown, Moody had now had 7 stations scattered. They'd gotten a station in Spokane, St. Petersburg, and West Palm Beach, and East Moline, and Cleveland, and Chicago, AM and FM stations in many of those markets. Bob Neff asked me if I would move to Chicago with my family and become the director of broadcast stations. And, very interesting because now Dick Florence, the guy who hired me at WCRF and is now at WRMB in Boynton Beach, West Palm Beach, Florida, I was his boss.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
I mean, only in radio. It's like, and you were young too. I mean, you were still
young.
very young.
Too young.
Yeah. And you keep saying that.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, Dick Florence was as gracious and kind and patient with me as anybody you can imagine, and never gave me a hint of like, what's this young guy doing?
Yeah.
I know more. I've forgotten more radio than he knows.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, learning by doing and by making mistakes. So 1982 to 1986, I was leading the group of stations working in Chicago. And then in 1986, I got a call from Mike Trout at Focus on the Family. And Mike said, John, we are expanding here. We need someone to run the day-to-day broadcast operations. He was the vice president of broadcasting. He was the co-host of the radio show Focus on the Family with Dr. James Dobson. And so busy doing that, he needed an operational manager for broadcasting. And so in 1986, in August, we moved out to Southern California. And I served there. I was on the cabinet with Dr. Dobson. I got a chance to see the ministry up close and personal, behind the scenes, and had really a very growing experience there.
Oh, your front row seat.
Learned a lot. Wonderful people. And but we were not Southern Californians.
Yeah.
I mean, we were Midwesterners, and
it's a different world.
If you asked our son and our daughter, they loved it.
Who wouldn't? I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, back then, particularly, it was very different than it is now, and you could afford it and all kinds of stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing about Southern California, as you well know, unless you have some money, you're not living on the beach. You're not living in Newport Beach or in Pasadena. Yeah. You're living in Azusa, folks, okay? And nothing against Azusa.
And it is like it sounds,
It is, but we loved it and really grew a lot there and learned a lot. But I'll tell you, when Bob Neff called me in 1989 and said, your old job is open again, come on back. We jumped at it. Yeah. So we picked up in November of 89. Bobby had graduated from high school. He had not decided where to go to college yet. Molly was a sophomore. She took the brunt of the move.
Yeah, that is just almost impossible to do to somebody.
She was on the varsity cheerleading squad as a sophomore. Had so many friends.
Yeah.
Loved her little Christian school there, and so we just ripped her heart out.
Yeah.
And God bless her, she was a trooper, and she fared fine, but it was not easy for her.
No, that's tough, man. That's a tough experience.
Yeah.
But again, there's a very different ethos culturally and otherwise.
Yeah.
In different parts of the country. Everybody who's lived in different places knows that.
Yeah, so. There is, and some people adjust just fine, and they become part of that community and that ethos, and it works.
Right.
For us, we probably could have stayed and been fine, but the opportunity presented itself, and I just felt, but Tanya and I both felt, we've got to do this. So
right.
We came back in 89. The stations had grown. I think we were up to about 11 or 12 stations at that time, and lived out way northwest of the city in Lake Zurich.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, we had a long
commuted in town from there.
We did, and then my wife is a professional florist. By the way, a lot of people don't realize that.
I did not know that.
Very talented florist.
Oh, that's a very artistic and difficult skill set to put all that together.
Not only that, she got a job at the Holland Flower Mark in Winnetka.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And we're talking Winnetka, okay?
Yeah.
Old money and a lot of it.
And let me tell you something, folks. If y'all, I mean, what John has just described is an understatement of what that is. There was a shop, I don't know if it's still there. It's called Betty's of Winnetka.
Yep.
And it was kind of like where the hoi polloi, the ladies of the ladies would go there. And we would always make fun of it in terms of that. So that she was in some high cotton there, as we would say.
She was, and her clientele were also quite wealthy and quite famous.
Sure.
She did the Christmas scene for the set of Hollywood Squares.
Okay. Yeah.
The
game show back in the day is for those people that are not familiar with it, but very popular.
Yep. And some who will be familiar with horse racing know the trainer Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
Very famous. I don't remember his first name. Maybe George.
Yeah, I don't either.
But she did his home and got to know that family. She worked with the Hallis family.
Yeah.
Who is
Chicago
Bears fame. And so really, I mean, she was good and worked very hard at it. But so she got that job in Winnetka. We were living in Lake Zurich. So by the time we got her to Winnetka and then me downtown Chicago, we were, commuting for 2.5 hours one way. And
folks, trust me, that is not an easy commute. That isn't just like driving in the countryside and enjoying it.
No.
It was a brutal commute.
So brutal. So we decided we better move closer to the lake. And so we got a condo in Evanston, right on Central Avenue, about three,
I know well.
Yeah,
I know that.
About 3 blocks away from the Northwestern College football stadium.
Yep.
Dyke Stadium at the time.
Yep.
And so we loved it. I mean, we lived there for a couple of years and would walk down to the football games. This is when Northwestern didn't have a team. Then they had a team. Now they don't have a team. But back then,
me, that's my alma mater.
Yeah.
I just want to show, I was there when Northwestern set the NCAA consecutive losing streak.
Yep.
I saw one victory my second or third game of freshman year, and we lost every game for the next 4 years, and we were losing by like 50, 60, 70, 80 to nothing. So
well,
yeah, I know those eras.
But that changed. And so when we first moved there, we would decide, we'd get up Saturday morning, we'd have our coffee. Hey, what do you think? Want to go down to the game?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay, let's go.
You just walk right
no
in,
tickets.
Yeah.
Go up, get a ticket on the 50-yard line of the visitor side, and watch college football.
Yeah.
Well, a year later, Pat Fitzgerald and some other stars came along, and that all changed. And they beat Notre Dame. They beat Michigan, and they won the Big Ten championship.
Big Ten. Yeah,
and went to the Rose Bowl.
Pasadena.
Yeah, and so
I got a call. I got a bunch of calls from some of my friends from school saying, you got to come to the game. You got to come to the game. We're all getting together in Pasadena. Maybe the only time in our lifetimes we'll be able to do this. So
yeah, so that was fun. We really enjoyed that. And then this is around the time when we found Orthodoxy.
Now that's a story that is really important for people to understand. I've heard bits and pieces of it in our conversations from before, but I think this is really a critical. Obviously, it's a big point of inflection, and it's we could say the genesis of Ancient Faith Ministries and so much more. But anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to make sure that we don't pass over that without really digging into that in depth.
The radio part of me says it's time for a break. The biological part of me says it's definitely time for a break.
All right, so then that exactly was what we needed to hear. Let me tell you something, my brothers and sisters, when you have the man who's running this who does this for a living as opposed to us who do it are amateurs, then we're going to take a short break right now. And when we return, we're going to hear the next phase of the amazing, amazing story of Gentleman John, the platinum-tongue guru who created this juggernaut that we call Ancient Faith Ministries. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
Bill will be right back, but please remember that this show is pre-recorded, so we are unable to take your calls. If you have any questions or want any further information, you can email Bill at bill@stewardshipcalling.com.
How many listeners does it take to support Ancient Faith Radio? This is not some sort of setup to a joke. It's actually a really good question. The answer is quite a few. especially when you consider that AFR relies exclusively on such people, most of whom contribute small, humble gifts of $100 or less. This means that all of the podcasts on Ancient Faith Radio, all of the live shows and music and conferences and videos and audio documentaries are entirely sustained by regular, everyday listeners who give what they can spare out of appreciation for the station and what they have gleaned from it. It's both an encouraging and terrifying base of support. On the one hand, it's exactly what a healthy ministry needs to grow and thrive. Dependence on a handful of angel donors or foundation grants is not a sustainable business model for a nonprofit. All it takes is the loss of just one of these income sources to plunge your organization into financial ruin. No, it is far better to be funded in small amounts by a great number of individuals. Of course, the downside to this arrangement is just that you need a great number of faithful backers. Indeed, a ministry such as Ancient Faith Radio requires a majority of its users to participate in the listener-supported model to guarantee its longevity. So ask yourself, when was the last time I contributed my tiny bit to the ongoing work of AFR? Am I doing my small part to keep the station thriving and growing? Your donation today, in combination with all of the other modest gifts that we seek on a monthly basis, could be what keeps the lights on at AFR and the audio rolling. It's easy to do. Just go to ancientfaith.com and click on Donate in the upper right-hand corner. Be a participant. Be a partner. Be one of the many, many listeners it takes to support Ancient Faith Radio.
Stewardship Calling is back. And please remember that this show is pre-recorded, so we are unable to take your calls. If you have any questions or want any further information, you can email Bill at stewardshipcalling.com. Here again is Bill Marianis.
So welcome back to Stewardship Calling and our first Wednesday program where I am speaking with the just amazing, what I call a platinum-tongued gentleman, John Maddex, who was the founder and truly chief visionary officer in every possible way of the juggernaut today that is Ancient Faith Ministries, bringing the global word and faith of orthodoxy all over the place. And so, John, we were listening to the journey and the incredible points of inflection of your life that made it inevitable for you to do what you're doing. But in the course of that journey, while we have you clearly in leadership positions at Moody, one of the premier broadcast organizations, and somebody that really understood what it meant to use new at the time technology and media to bring an old and ancient message to a hungry audience. But at the time, you're still not Orthodox. So this whole notion of Orthodoxy is still out there. And it's not, so talk about in where you were and what you were doing and how that intersection occurred.
Yeah. Well, Orthodoxy was so foreign to me. It was not on my radar whatsoever. I grew up in a Christian home. I was evangelical to the core. Yeah. And anything that resembled Catholic or liturgical, to me, was wrong-headed. It was just not where God wanted people. He wanted them to be innovative and fresh and relevant. And so I can remember when we lived in Cleveland, one of the places we lived was in Broadview Heights, Ohio. And right around the corner from our little home was St. Michael's Orthodox Church, OCA, in Broadview Heights. And we would drive by that church, and it looked so foreign to us.
Oh, yeah.
It had the domes. It had icons. We'd never been inside, but it was so foreign. And I can remember, Tanya and I would talk as we'd go by. I don't know what's happening inside there, but it's not Christian, whatever it is.
There's some strange goings on around there.
Yeah. So, this is my framework for orthodoxy. Now, spin forward. We're living in Evanston. Our daughter, Molly, is a junior at the Moody Bible Institute. Our son just graduated from Wheaton College. Mm-hmm. And we heard that our daughter had found a boyfriend at Moody. And, I can remember I had my office.
We heard.
We heard.
This is kind of like, there's a story there. I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but
yeah.
How did you hear this? Where did this come from? Was this from one of your sources or from one of her sources?
Well, okay,
did Bobby squeal? What happened?
No, my office was in Kroll Hall of the Moody Bible Institute on the 8th floor, overlooking the plaza where students would hang out.
Ah.
Okay. So I had a good view of students. And
as a former teenager who had scouted out a wife at a very early age, you knew what to look for.
I knew. So I'm looking out my office window and I see our daughter walking hand in hand with a young man.
Oh my gosh.
My first instinct was to pick up the phone and call security.
I have the power to have this kid arrested.
I can ruin you. So
you didn't know who it was, obviously.
Didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
Found out later that this young man's name was Troy, and finally got a chance to meet him. Nice enough guy. Didn't think it was really anything serious. It's nice to have a friend to do things with. He seemed pretty safe.
And he was Moody. He was part of the Moody family,
Moody kid,
right?
Yeah. And his family, he has a wonderful family. They are very good friends of ours. Yeah. But they are from a long line of evangelical free Christians, very, solid, reputable Christian group. And so I had nothing to worry about with Troy.
Right.
But what I found out later was that Molly and Troy, have been going occasionally to this Orthodox church, the Holy Trinity Cathedral on Levitt in Chicago, OCA Cathedral, because in a Moody class, Troy was taking a class on music, and the instructor was talking about liturgical music.
Yeah.
And, a lot of you kids, you don't know so much about liturgical music, but you should. There's a rich tradition of liturgy and music, and we live right in the heart of Chicago. And you don't have to walk more than a block or two to experience something very different than you're used to at your churches at home.
Right.
So they had an assignment. Find a church to visit that is nothing like your home church.
And as you said, that ain't hard in Chicago.
Not too hard.
Yeah.
So he found his way to Holy Trinity. And long story short, he fell in love with the liturgy. He adored the hymns and the reverence and the beauty and the transcendence. He immediately embraced this thought that I want to be Orthodox someday. And so,
which had to be really hard, given the long-standing tradition of his family.
Well, it would be, as you can imagine. We were worried about our daughter, so I'm sure Troy's folks were worried about their son. Yeah. And so we didn't know about this for a while until sometime after Easter. Molly was home during her spring break, I guess it was, and she said, well, I got to tell you about an experience Troy and I had that was unbelievable. I cannot even begin to describe the impact this had on us. We attended an Easter service at the Orthodox Church. And she said they call it Pascha. And she started to describe, they were there for Holy Thursday, Holy Friday, and then for the procession and the liturgy for Pascha. And she started to describe the events and what's going on, what's happening. And her eyes are welling up in tears. I've never seen her talk about spiritual things so emotionally. And of course, we weren't too worried about it. I mean, wow, what a great, expansive experience.
Yeah, it's like, listening to somebody describe a movie that they went to that was impactful.
Yeah, but, now get on back, so you had that experience. Let's come on home. Well, they didn't come back. They kept going. And they started going to catechism classes and learning and growing and just becoming more and more in love with this while they're still students at Moody. Now, spin forward after graduation, Troy is now, got a job and is working. Molly is working. They're still dating. And Troy, God bless him, he did the old-fashioned appointment with me because he had a question.
Okay.
And so we all knew what that question was. Yeah. Molly and Tanya conveniently went shopping.
Yeah.
And doorbell rings. There's Troy at our little Evanston condo. And we sat down. And he's, basically said, I would like your blessing to marry your daughter. And I mean, I was blown away because that's really classy.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing like that. That's amazing.
And so we talked, and I said, Troy, we think the world of you. Really, really do. We love you. And I think you would be a wonderful husband for my daughter. But this Orthodox thing, I just have to tell you, really concerns me. It's not what Molly was brought up in. We taught her differently. I mean, we were Calvinists. We were 5-point Calvinists. And anybody who knows what the tulip stands for, we bought it all.
Yeah.
And so, and he, very respectful. I get that. It was certainly strange for me at first, too. But I'll tell you, there's something here that I wish you would learn more about. Would you be...
So he was pushing you to take, to get in.
Well, I mean, but very respectfully.
Of course.
And so he said, and basically he wanted me to have a comfort level for him and for where he would take their family should they get married. So he said, would you be willing to read some books if I gave them to you? And I said, I'll make you a deal. I will read your books if you'll read mine.
You read mine. Yeah, there you go.
So we exchanged books. And I gave him books by R.C. Sproul and Hodge and Van Til and all of these Reformed teachers, from very recent years, comparatively speaking.
Sure.
And he gave
big guns.
Yep, and he gave me some ancient wisdom literature from the church, but also gave me what was the linchpin, the story of Father Peter Gilchrist, coming from an evangelical background into the Orthodox Church and coming with a very large group of evangelicals, many of whom were involved with Campus Crusade for Christ. Well, I knew what Campus Crusade for Christ was. I mean, I did projects with Campus Crusade for Christ. We went on trips with friends from Campus Crusade for Christ.
Really
a big deal.
That don't know. I mean,
highly
respected.
Kind of
as big as it got in the Christian world at the time.
Very highly respected.
Sure.
And so I read Becoming Orthodox, and what struck me about Father Peter was the sincerity of his honest journey. This group, they came to their journey with nothing on the table. They stripped everything away, and they said, let's start from the beginning. Let's forget everything we've learned since we've been Christians, and let's start to focus on what did the early church believe? What did they believe about worship? What did they believe about confession? What did they believe about the Eucharist? What did they believe about church structure? And they assigned various members of their group to do research, and then they would come back together and share their findings. And people like Richard Ballou and Jack Sparks and Father Peter and John Braun, these heroes of mine faced truth, and they followed truth no matter where it would lead.
See, that's a powerful phrase that you just used. That is And honestly, it's a courageous phrase that you used, that when confronted with truth, you just say, okay, I'm going. I'm not going to argue.
Well, and that same question is what we had to face eventually. We weren't ready yet.
Yeah.
But eventually it really came down to if we find in our minds, if we're convinced that this story is right and that their research is right, if that's what we end up finding out, and we say to each other, this is truth, and we don't follow that, we got a problem.
That's why it's such a big deal, because once you're confronted with it, you can't put that genie back in the bottle.
Well, and what happened? We found ourselves reading that book, just devouring it. Mm-hmm. And then he said, how about reading this one? He gave us For the Life of the World by Schmemann.
Yeah.
And
he's piling on.
He's piling on.
Yeah, the tackle's already been made.
Yeah.
The quarterback's already on the ground, and he's just got the whole line just jumping on top of you, just pounding you into the dirt.
Well, and so as we're reading, and I'm truncating a 3-year journey into
3 years, huh?
to about 10 minutes here.
Oh, wow. 3 years.
What we found ourselves getting to is over the course of those 3 years, we started off filled with objections.
Of course.
Why? This can't be. We had it all. Yeah. And then we found ourselves going from that to, well, you know what? There is a lot we can learn from this church. And I can remember telling my daughter, I'll never be Orthodox, but
it's an interesting thing, right?
There is something we can learn from you guys.
Yeah.
And I remember she snickered just a little bit. And she reminds me regularly that I made that statement, even to this day.
Yeah, in other words, all-knowing, all-seeing dad. Let me tell you something. You didn't know this.
I'll never be Orthodox. Right. So over time, we got to the point where we needed to at least experience a service. And so Troy...
So you had not been at a service?
Never been inside the walls of a
For 3 years of reading and studying and finding and arguing, and you still didn't go to the service?
I would say for a year of this. It took 3 years, but it included about a year into it, this first visit, where he invited us to go with them to the Divine Liturgy of Christ, or of Holy Trinity Cathedral in downtown Chicago at Division and Levitt, OCA. And so we got in, we went through the front doors, and it was overload. There were candles and icons and incense filling and smells and bells and people chanting just about as fast as they could get the words out. Lord of mercy, Lord of mercy, Lord of mercy, Lord of mercy, Lord of mercy.
Right.
And I'm looking at Tanya. I said, what is this?
Did it feel so? I guess stop and ask you. Here's the question I'm going to ask you, and then I'll give you a second to think about it. Did it feel to you in that first moment somewhat cult-like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It did. And it's fear. It's fear of the unknown. Sure. I know nothing about this. I can't explain it. I don't understand it. I don't know what's going on. Therefore, it's wrong.
Yeah, but these people seem serious, so
they're pretty serious.
They drank some Kool-Aid along the way.
They're pretty serious.
Yeah.
So, and Bobby and his wife came along, and so now you have Molly and Troy, Bobby and his wife, and Tanya and me going to brunch afterwards in Evanston.
Okay.
And we're at, I don't know if you remember that cafe that's right across the street from Harvest Bread. On Central there. It was about a block from our house, and it's had various names, but it had great breakfast. So we went there for brunch, and we're sitting around drinking our coffee, waiting for our breakfast, and Troy says, well, John, what did you think? And I just looked at him. I said, Troy, I'll have to tell you, I don't get it. I just don't get it. I don't see the lure here. I don't see the compelling nature. I don't understand what draws you here. Where was the message? Where was the sermon? The guy who gave the sermon did it in about 5 minutes. He was an older man. His English was broken. Very soft spoken. I could hardly hear him. And so I felt they gave short shrift to what I felt was the jewel of any service. Right. It's the sermon. They also,
for those that are not familiar, that's kind of one of the big juxtapositions where, in the tradition in which you were raised and which still exists, of course, the sermon becomes the central focus.
It's absolutely the central focus. It's a 45-minute to an hour and a half lecture, depending on the church. So we are talking about it, and I said, and not only that, what did they do to the Lord's Prayer? I mean, the Lord's Prayer clearly has an ending, and they didn't do it.
Yeah, these guys forgot.
They forgot, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. That's how the Lord's Prayer ends. It doesn't end at deliver us from evil, and then some other thing about, the Trinity. And so I said, it's just nothing about it. It draws me to this.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm sorry to hear that. Maybe you'd like to try again. And
so he didn't like let it go.
Oh, no. And so I said, well, I'm doing all the talking here. Tanya, what did you think? Well, bless her heart, she's now starting to cry.
Uh-oh. You didn't expect that. Of all the things you expect her to say, and he's right. And
not only that.
Yeah, exactly. I've got 3 more things that are bizarre.
Yeah. So she comes out with, well, all I know is I think I've worshiped for the first time in my life this morning.
Say that
truly,
again.
I think I have truly worshiped for the first time in my life.
Thank God. There you go.
Well, you can say thank God if you want.
Yeah. It was not thank God moment for you.
Not at that point. It is now.
Yeah.
But it wasn't then. So where do I turn to my Wheaton College son, trained at the Wheaton College in theology.
He's going to be there.
He'll be there.
Yeah, there's no question.
His answer was, well, Dad, Paige and I have been going there with them for the last several months.
You thought you had an ally. In the meantime, they'd already stolen
I'm literally standing alone.
Yeah.
So, fortunately, because of our relationship, it wasn't tense. It wasn't. It was just, wow, I'm going to have to really think about this. And so we didn't talk about it for, very often after that until a few months later. Father Peter Gilchrist was coming to town, and he was going to be at All Saints Antiochian Orthodox Church in Chicago. This is before Father Pat Reardon became the pastor. And so Troy called and said, hey, remember that book you read that you liked, Becoming Orthodox? The author's going to be there. We'll go with you if you want to come. So I said, well, yeah, I'd like to meet him. And so we went to hear him speak. So now, Father Peter Gilchrist, if you've not met him, is a big man, tall, 6'6" at least, and broad-shouldered, deep, booming voice. Yeah. And he walks up to the podium with a big old study Bible under his arm.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking
that's a commanding presence.
This is good so far.
Yeah, he's going to preach for an hour.
Yep.
I know that.
Yep. So and I'll tell you what he did, and he used all the right language. He talked like I could understand someone, and I said, "Well, that's a side of orthodoxy I didn't know existed."
Yeah.
Here's a man who is convicted about his faith, passionate about it, articulate about it, and interested in bringing people to Christ. And he didn't talk about bringing people to orthodoxy. He talked about bringing people to the Savior. And I thought, they believe that in orthodoxy?
I didn't quite hear that in that first experience I had.
It wasn't evident in my first experience. Now, years later, I could go back to Holy Trinity and feel like I'm in heaven. Okay, so please know, those of you who are at Holy Trinity, you have a jewel there that is to be beloved and protected. And I love every time I go back there now. But
well, can I interrupt for one?
Yeah, sure.
Because this is a message that I think is important for everyone to hear, regardless of what church you go to. And I don't care what church you go to, anywhere in the orthosphere. There are people. There's a John Maddex who had an experience at your parish, and has cherished that experience. And while you may take it for granted because you walk in and out of there hopefully every Sunday or more frequently than that, but at least you're walking in and out of there. There are people who are having life-changing experiences, and you need to understand that. Of course, you also should do something about it to support that, but there are people that will remember your parish with an experience that they had, and that is a gift that you've given people.
Well, and thank God for those who were born in the Orthodox faith who didn't make us feel uncomfortable, who came alongside and they understood that it's different for us. They were patient. They loved us into the church. But at All Saints, okay, this is where Father Peter was. We lit up a little bit there because that was a church that was mostly converts, mostly evangelical. There were Wheaton people there, Moody people, Trinity University people, Calvin College people. I mean, these were our people. Yeah. And they were all Orthodox now. And so Tanya and I said, well, let's try All Saints. And so we started going to All Saints, and we started attending, I think, around February of 98.
Okay, so you're leading right into the Paschal season.
Yep.
You're going to get it.
Yep. And then, so they had a temporary pastor there who was a former evangelical as well. And so he is talking the week before Pascha about the plans for the weekend. And he says, now, for some of you, this is a new experience, but bring your Easter baskets because we're going to bless them with holy water. And also bring hard-boiled eggs that you've dyed red because we're going to have the cracking of the egg ceremony.
And now you're really feeling like this is a cult, right? They're blessing baskets and cracking eggs.
Seriously, I got home and on the way home, I said, Tanya, we cannot be a part of this.
Yeah, these people are showing up crazy, man. They're doing all kinds
Easter
of
baskets, holy water, red eggs. And this is the resurrection. Why aren't they talking about the resurrection?
Yeah,
well, little did I know.
Focused here, right?
Yeah. So then look over at her, more tears.
Yeah.
And she said, well, honey, if this isn't it, we're going nowhere. I'd rather not go to church at all if we can't go here.
Oh man. Oh,
so now she found it.
Forget Father Peter Gilquist. I mean, he's in the rear view mirror now. Your life partner just said, hey, this is where we're going to live.
Yeah, yeah. And so hearkening back to something you said a little earlier, I wanted to remember because this is where we were at the point. We were too far forward to go back, but too afraid to go forward.
Say that again. That is so powerful. Look, there are people right now who, God willing, will listen to this program, and this will be the moment that really resonates with them.
You get to a point where you realize you have found something that's totally different than you know, but that feels right. And you get to that point where you can't go back, but nor do you have the courage to go forward. Now, my situation was a little different than most. There are people that are at that point who do not work for the Moody Bible Institute.
Yes, that's an important point.
And who are doctors or lawyers can say, who gives a rip what people think?
Right.
I'm following this.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how am I going to explain this?
Yeah, they are not going to get Moody. They are not going to get this. This is about as foreign as you. You could have come in there speaking an entirely different language and then had a better chance of success than telling them that.
And I wasn't honest with myself, and I look back at it and I can see now that my arguments, my objection to orthodoxy had nothing to do with the truth. It had everything to do with the argument. I was going to have to explain this to somebody. Yeah. And I needed to have the answers. I needed to be able to show from Scripture why we were making this journey. I knew we were in the right place. I knew this has got to be right. This is what we've been looking for. But what am I going to say when I'm asked about this, when I'm asked about that? Well, now comes a new priest to All Saints. We had stopped going, and we were drifting. And one of the former evangelicals, who was a very close friend of ours now, John Thompson, sent me a note by email and said, "Hey, we miss you. We have a new priest. Maybe you've heard of him. It's Patrick Henry Reardon." Well, I was familiar with Touchstone magazine. I loved that they really took the best of evangelical, Catholic, and Orthodox thinkers and put it in a magazine, and I thought that's impressive. And one of the regular contributors to Touchstone magazine was Patrick Henry Reardon, and I read some of his stuff. And so I thought, well, okay, I'd like to meet him. I said, but how long can we audit the course?
Audit the course.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not committing to anything.
No.
You're not getting my tuition dollars. I'm auditing.
Yeah. Well, next thing I know, I get an email from Father Pat himself.
Uh-oh.
Hello, John. We've not met, but I would love to meet you. And as far as auditing the course, Orthodoxy is in no hurry. Come on down.
So he was pretty gracious about it.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to saying, call me again when you're serious.
Right.
Yeah.
So we started going. We met Father Pat and Cordia Denise, and I wanted to find out, does this man know the Bible? I mean, does he even know scriptures?
Yeah, you knew it.
Yeah. Well.
So you attest him.
Yeah. So we had breakfast with them, and then we met with them. We had them at our home in Evanston at our little condo there. And I'm just grilling him on all the questions that I had. And I'm learning very quickly that this man has forgot more scripture than I've ever known. I mean, you talk about a biblical scholar.
Yeah.
This man was steeped in scripture. And he had the answers. And he was able to show me in scripture the basis for the theology of the church. And it took time, but finally we felt we were ready, and we told Father Pat, I think we're ready. Well, Father Pat says, not yet.
Yeah. See, that is something, honestly, that is, and I've heard this story over and over again. I mean, and I've listened to other programs where people tell their stories, and they often get to that, you're not ready yet. You think you are, but you're really not ready yet. And that, honestly, I got to believe is something unique about Orthodoxy. It's not intentionally off-putting, but it's are you really there? I mean, this isn't just something you join and feel good about and say hallelujah and amen. Are you really committed?
Well,
that was amazing.
The issue was the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And he knew. And I said, well, why not? And he says, well, when people come to the chalice, what are they partaking of? And I said, well, symbols of the body and blood in Christ. He said, you're not ready.
Wrong answer.
You're not ready. So, that took some time. And so he suggested a book by a Catholic man by the name of Thomas Howard. Thomas Howard, who's reposed, is the brother of the now reposed, very famous and well-respected Elizabeth Elliot. Elizabeth Elliot was the widow of Jim Elliot, one of the martyrs in Guatemala, or Ecuador. And became then, after his death, she became a very famous writer, very highly respected, someone we used a lot at Moody. And I had such high respect for her. I knew that her brother had become Catholic, but I'd never read anything that he wrote. What he recommended was a book called Evangelical is Not Enough. Short little book. If you can find it, I highly recommend it, especially if you're on the fence about what the early church taught about real presence of the Eucharist, of Christ in the Eucharist.
Evangelical is not enough. Okay.
Evangelical is not enough. Because
that's a pretty, it's a pretty insulting at one level kind of story, but I mean, it's really kind of saying a how-to. It's like, hey, listen, I got to tell you the rest of the story.
Yeah, it's not that evangelicalism is so bad.
Right.
It's just so lacking. It's just, okay, you're part of the way. Yeah. How about taking the whole step, Yeah. So, here's what I was looking for. I had decided, Tanya and I together decided at some point, we were going from our current belief system and presuppositions and moving backwards to see where it could be traced. And And you do that for a couple of 100 years, and you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
So we said, well, we're doing it wrong. We have to start from the apostles and find out, is there a way to find out what they believed in the 2nd century, in the 3rd century, in the 4th century? And you need to know, in my Sunday school, we knew nothing about those guys. Church history ended at the resurrection of Christ and it became active again at the Reformation. So there's
a break
gap
for a while, for a couple 100 years, and then all of a sudden,
it's like the Holy Spirit left the church, floundering for those 1,300 years.
100 years, yeah.
Well, Thomas Howard started quoting church fathers, people who had discipled the Apostle John. The person who discipled that disciple, and showing quotes where without a single exception, every one of them believed in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And I started getting mad. I started getting angry, saying,
mad. Okay, so that's interesting.
Well, because my reaction was, why didn't anybody tell me this?
Oh, okay.
Who decided that it's just a symbol? And on what basis did they decide that? Did they just decide, well, that's what we think Scripture teaches? I said, wait a minute. You think Scripture teaches that, but the people from the 3rd century who were very close to when the Scriptures were canonized, they don't believe what you believe. Yeah. So somewhere along the line, from the Council of Nicaea, moving forward to the Reformation, and frankly, post-Reformation, Zwingli, etc., somebody decided that, no, it's not really the body and blood of Christ. It's a symbol. Yeah. And I said, that's wrong.
Yeah.
You cannot justify that. There is nothing you can tell me that justifies that significant of a change in your theology based on your reading of Scripture. So that was the linchpin. When I was able to connect the dots from the early church to today and see a consistent, unbroken, golden thread of theology, I either am going to embrace that or I'm going to deny the faith.
Yeah.
You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, the truth is the truth. I mean,
the truth is the truth.
It may be uncomfortable. It may be, in this moment in time, it may be challenging, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, long story short,
at the end of the day, it was the Eucharist.
Yeah.
I mean, that was
it was. That was it. It was the real presence of Christ that we ingest in our flesh every Sunday morning. That it becomes part of us.
Which is why, from a theological perspective, and certainly from a preaching perspective, anytime you are separated from it, you're separated from a source of connection with Christ. I mean, not saying you are separated from Christ, obviously, but you're separated from a source of connection. And I was talking recently to an Orthodox priest that I'm working with, and that was one of the points that he made was, this COVID period was so disruptive to people because for a period of time, obviously, they were not permitted in many places in the country or the world, for that matter, to participate in the Eucharist. And, he felt like, these folks just really weren't getting fed with the spiritual food they needed. Yeah. So once you're confronted that it is what Christ said it was, and it wasn't what some man said it was, then how do you go back?
Well, you don't. And what happened is a longing, a deep, profound longing in our innermost being for that Eucharist welled up, and it just became overwhelming that we wanted to be Orthodox sooner than later. And at that point, Father Pat said, it's time.
You got it now. So the crying that Tanya did, or the tearing up that she did in that moment early on, first service, may or may not have been in any way directly attributed to that. But she clearly saw something that your defensiveness was keeping you from seeing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The purity of her heart and her faith is undeniable. Yeah. And she has the ability of thinking in very clear yet simple terms.
Yeah.
And, it didn't take long. She was ready long before I was. So
now you got a real problem.
Yeah,
right?
now we have a problem.
Now you got family synergy.
Yeah.
More importantly, you have Christ-centered synergy, but everything about that is in opposite with where you work and what they believe.
Yeah. And so I can remember shortly after we were chrismated, this was in 2000, the year 2000, that I would go back to my office at Moody and start to think about, well, now what? Do I tell somebody? Do I keep it a secret? Do I find somebody who I love and trust, who have, good head on their shoulders to confide in? And I chose the latter. I had identified a handful of very spiritually minded individuals at Moody that I loved and trusted. One was the radio pastor at Moody, Donald Cole.
Radio pastor. Now, that's an interesting phrase.
Yeah.
What is a radio pastor?
It's just what you think it is if you're an evangelical. So, a pastor of a church, we know what that is. That's the shepherd. He was, in a way, the spiritual shepherd of the staff, but also content. And so he would, his call-in show is the predecessor for the concept of Father Evan Armitas's show, Orthodoxy Live. So that's where the idea sprung from. But so highly respected, and he and his wife Naomi are with the Lord now. And he listened so patiently and was so affirming of our journey. And John, you have found something that you must pursue.
So he was not resistant.
He was not resistant in the least. And had enough of a theological brain and perspective that he knew why.
Yeah.
And then a few others who had come along. There's a former professor at Moody who now teaches at the Liberty and the theology department, Dr. Brian Litvin, who is also very supportive. And again, he has studied the Church Fathers. He has written books introducing the Church Fathers to the evangelical community. And he, after he had found out that I became Orthodox, he contacted me and said, John, I'm really happy to hear this. This is something that excites me, that thrills me. And I want our students to be exposed to more of this side of the church. And so for a while there, he had me bring Father Pat Reardon to speak to the students at Moody. And it was fascinating to see them interact together and to just watch them listen and see their minds just explode and expand. About a year or two later, I'm at a Touchstone conference. And a friend of mine who was an evangelical pastor out in the Wheaton area also was at that conference. And we've known each other for years. We were friends when he was a pastor of a church in Cleveland. And so he knew of our journey. He was on a journey himself. In fact, he's now an Orthodox priest. And he said to me, John, you have got all this experience in radio. Is there not a way that you can use that for the Orthodox Church?
So he planted the seed.
He planted the seed. Father Wilbur, then Pastor Wilbur Ellsworth, who's now the priest at Holy Transfiguration Antiochian Church in Warrensville, Illinois, near Wheaton. Okay. Well, that seed just troubled me. I couldn't sleep at all that night, and I started wondering, well, how are we going to do this? All the radio frequencies are used up. There's no frequencies in a market of any size unless you buy a station, and a full power FM station in Chicago had just sold for $250 million.
Yeah, I mean, that buying spectrum was very, very expensive.
Yeah, that ship has sailed. I mean, those stations are gone. There's no new frequencies available, so we either buy a station or we're out of luck. And I can remember someone had mentioned something to me about a new innovation where people were literally using the internet to stream, and the word stream was even new to me, music, and creating kind of an internet-based radio station. So I started researching, going online, looking up internet radio. And I came across a Southern Gospel Quartet internet radio station.
Southern Gospel
That's right.
Quartet.
Yeah, it was a niche within a niche.
Boy, you talk about a niche, yeah.
And so I started listening, and I'm thinking, this sounds really good. The quality was good. There was professional announcer going, in between and giving station IDs. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I recognize that voice.
Oh, no.
And so it was a man that I had known from my National Religious Broadcasters days that used to manage a station up in Madison. And so I found his email address from my files, and I said, I'm listening to this Gospel Quartet internet radio station, and I'm pretty sure that's your voice I'm listening to.
Sounds familiar.
And he said, that's me. And I said, you've got to tell me how you do this. And so he said, it's not that hard. And I will send you a list of the equipment that I'm using. And it's not expensive. So Tanya and I, this was around October of 2004 or 2004. And so we didn't have the money to buy the equipment. So we took out a loan on our house. And we went down to the Mac store. We bought an iMac computer. We went and found some hardware for interface and a mixer and some microphones, and then the software that he had recommended. And we started doing research based on his guidance, how to put this together. So
you actually literally mortgaged the house.
A tiny loan.
But it doesn't matter. I mean, the point is that's a risk that most people, when you start to think about, and I'm not trying to hold you up in some deity kind of sense, although I do think of you that way. But I mean, how strong is your faith? How much do you believe? And forget the faith part of it, perspective. In the things in which you believe, what are you prepared to do it? And one of the questions I ask a lot of people is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And clearly there's a lot of fear associated with what you're talking about, but to actually run the risk that this would go down and you still got to pay off the loan, otherwise you lose the house. Yeah. I mean, that is courage. That is leadership.
Well, so we didn't have any music. That's our first problem. It's a great idea. But
a radio station with no music. Yeah. How do you do this?
So I went to our parish at All Saints, and during coffee hour, I asked Father Pat if I could make an announcement. And I used the software to put together a sample of what this could sound like. And I did a little 3-minute demo.
Oh, wow.
And played it for them. And I said, what would you think if there was a station that sounded like this that anybody in the world could listen to?
And they probably looked at you like you had snakes coming out of your ears.
Exactly. Yeah. Although they loved what they heard, they just had no idea how in the world we'd pull that off.
Yeah, how do we get to the world when we can't even, we're trying to figure out how to get through Chicago traffic?
So I said, but here's what we're lacking. We need CDs. And so if you have Orthodox music in your home, we need to borrow it for a week. We'll give it back. But if you can bring next week any CDs that you have. So next week, people started getting out of their cars with shopping bags
of CDs.
God. I mean, Tanya and I looked at each other and we said, you've got to be kidding. We didn't know there was so much Orthodox music available.
Exactly. Who made this stuff and why didn't we know about it?
Mostly foreign language. There wasn't a whole lot of English language music. Right. And of course, now we have a full station that's English language. Yeah. But back then, we'd take anything we could get. It was Greek, it was Byzantine, it was Serbian, it was all over the map. And so we started, the term is ripping it into your computer. So you open up the CD player and then you import the tracks and you make them MP3 files, and you create a folder where these MP3 files reside. And so now we've got a library of probably 200 tracks of Orthodox music. And so I started writing some scripts and recording spots, station identification. I came up with the phrase timeless Christianity, 24 hours a day. Now that was pretty cool.
That's a brand right there, baby. That is a brand.
Well, what wasn't so cool was the family trying to decide what to call the thing.
Yeah.
Because your saintly, bright, whatever you call me, his idea for what we should call it was Golden Mouth Radio.
There you go. This could have been something.
Yeah. To which Bobby said a resounding no.
Yeah. Bobby's had the right instincts on that one.
Yeah. I mean, they all three laughed at me. I said, okay, all right, it's not that, but we have to come up with something. So we just started brainstorming as a family, and we said, well, the church is ancient, and there's a need for more ancient in our society today. And so what we have is really the ancient faith, the ancient Christian faith that people need to learn about, and it's radio. So we finally landed on Ancient Faith Radio.
See, I never knew that story. You won't remember this, but this is probably a decade ago. And I won't name names, right? But you had the exhibition hall at the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, biennial clergy lady Congress, and I brought over one of the hierarchs, again, I won't name which one, and introduced him to y'all and whatnot. And I remember this guy saying, "You got the wrong name for this radio station.
Change the name."
Change the name. It's kind of like, I don't think so. I think they got a brand and they're going with it. And it's far more impactful, with all due respect, than what you're doing. So just, let alone.
Well, so that kind of became, what we called it. And so now we're into Thanksgiving weekend, 2004. We had our Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday. Friday was a day off for everybody at Moody. And so Tanya and I started really working hard on how can we make this work? All the music is in. I have enough. I have station IDs and other spots in there that we could put together a decent sounding stream of a radio station.
Yeah, this is now real now. You got all the homework done. You built your inventory. Now you got to open up the store for sale, right?
And so we had one computer, all right? And on that one computer, we were not only playing the music, but also listening to the music. And what we didn't realize is that when we went live and pulled the trigger on this thing, the computer is taking whatever audio you're feeding it.
Yeah.
And so now you have the original music, and then you have the repeated music coming back through the same speakers into this vicious cycle of echoing and confusion. That I thought, what's going on? This sounds terrible. I don't know what to do. And so
It really did sound like the Ancient Faith at that time.
It was crazy. It was crazy. So the light bulb went on. Well, idiot, you can't stream on the same computer that you are listening on. So we need a second computer. So we...
And with all due respect, nowadays, computers are ubiquitous. Everybody's got two probably hanging around somewhere in their house. Back then, the notion of getting a second computer for a family
was a little daunting.
Was like, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it didn't need to be anything fancy. You needed to be able to have something that could get to the internet and had speakers.
Yeah, I don't want any of these young people snickering at the store like, "What's the big deal?"
Right.
No, it really was a big deal.
Yeah, get a Chromebook, $150.
Yeah.
So finally, we were able to stream something that sounded decent, and we had a URL. We got the slots. You had to buy slots of listeners with these streaming providers. So you decide at what bandwidth you're going to stream at, and we chose 64K. And you have to decide how many listeners can listen at one time, and we chose 25.
That was it.
And so, I'd be thankful to have 2. So we sent a note out to the church family, and I said, here's the URL. All they want to know is, can you hear it?
Yeah.
And so they started calling me, wow, this is amazing. How are you doing this? This sounds so cool. And so I said, okay, good. Now let's promote it. And so people would, share the URL with other people. Right. And we started to see, we would look and we would rejoice every time we went up by 5 listeners. And we could see, oh, we're up to 10. Oh, right. We're up to 15. Uh-oh, we're up to 20. I run out of slots at 25.
Yeah.
So I kept calling the streaming provider and I, give me 25 more. Give me 25 more. And after this happened about 4 or 5 times, I would talk to the same guy and he said, tell me a little bit more about your station. You're growing like crazy. And, I said, yeah, internet station. He said, well, what's your format? I said, we're playing the best hits of the 50s. Oh, I love the 50s. Elvis Presley. I said, no.
The real 50s.
The 50s.
There's no number in front of the 50.
Yeah.
That's pretty fun. You didn't really say that. Did you say that?
I did say it.
Oh, you were setting them up. See, this is what you do. My opening was right. You are a conniver. You know how to hook somebody in and then get their curiosity engaged. That was pretty funny. The 50s.
Yeah. Conniving and deception are 2 different things, though.
Okay, I'll give you that.
So anyway, it just grew from there, and people started listening. And then we said, well, we should probably try to defray the costs in some way. And so, but I said, what if people do give us donations? We can't give them a tax-deductible receipt. We're not affiliated with any nonprofit. And so we went to the parish council at All Saints, and we proposed to them that they take Ancient Faith Radio under their wing as a ministry of the church. And then we would give a church receipt as part of the ministry. And so that's how we existed from 2005 until 2008 for 3 years.
So forgive me, I'm listening to your incredible story of the history of this channel, but I can't resist the lawyer side of me. He's going, okay, well, that was a copyright infringement, and now I'm seeing tax evasion and tax fraud, and I'm thinking, like, holy cow, this whole thing is built on a cards of illegality.
Yeah. So, relax.
Yeah, it's okay. It'll be fine.
Yes, ignorance is bliss.
We'll come visit you in jail.
Yeah, yeah, and. Of course, Metropolitan Philip was the hierarch at that time of the Antiochian Archdiocese. And of course, Father Pat had to get the blessing of his bishop, who got the blessing of the Metropolitan. And what? Internet? What?
Yeah, they were like, okay, but I don't know what I'm approving.
Yeah, but this is the ministry of your church. It's to evangelize. It's to help bring people into the church. You have our blessing. So
sounds good, right?
So, now the station is starting to grow. We're starting to get some donations. I mean, it's nowhere near enough to stop working and to make a living on this. So I was doing my day job while Tanya was recording members of All Saints who would come into our house like in droves. They would come next shift. They would sit down at a table with a microphone and they would read quotes from the church fathers and the Psalms. Tanya would find the quotes and she would prepare them for the reader. They would come in and read it. She would record it and edit it and get it ready. And then when I came home that night, I would import it into the stream, and we started having little snippets of readings from the fathers for 30 seconds, a minute. And many of those recordings are still used to this day on all 3 stations.
All right, so this clears up for any of the IRS agents that may be listening to this program. This is not tax fraud. This really was a legitimate ministry of the parish. What a brilliant way also to engage people in the ministry. And I think those that are listening ought to be thinking about how can you do the same kind of thing. That was really brilliant on your part.
Yeah, because it became their station too.
Yes,
they took ownership, and this was the All Saints station, and we call it Ancient Faith Radio, but it's a ministry of our parish.
Yeah.
So spin forward now to 2008. I get a call from none other than Deacon Michael Hyatt and Father Peter Gilquist. I mean, two of my heroes call me on the phone, who I may have met Father Peter once when we spoke, and Deacon Michael maybe one time at a conference. And they said, John, we are the board, two of members of the board, Deacon Michael was the chairman, of Conciliar Press. And we would like to propose something to you. Would you consider bringing Ancient Faith Radio together with Conciliar Press as one ministry? And, of course, my mind started reeling because I know what that's like. I know how to do that. I mean, Moody is a publisher and a broadcaster.
Right.
We did things together all the time with the publishing division, and some of
the dots of your life are connected.
Oh my goodness! The authors would become broadcasters. The broadcasters would become authors. You cross promote, and it was just marvelous to see that synergy. So I'm thinking this could be big, and so I went to the parish council and proposed it. And it bless their hearts, it was not an easy thing for them to consider giving up their baby. And I really hand it to them for their courage and their humility to finally say, this is best for the kingdom. And so these kingdom-minded people put aside their own desires and wishes and dreams so that the kingdom could be advanced through a synergetic relationship with a publisher who's already established, and it could be the next level of ministry for both. So,
and I think the message among so many that is in this very critical point of inflection is how we can actually take 1 + 1 and make 3.
Yeah.
If we will allow our own individual egos, our own sense of control, to give way to what Christ said when he said, "Go make disciples of all nations," and that there's only so much I can do, bandwidth wise, pun intended. But I think that you're right. It is a courageous moment for a parish to do that, and yet we have to ask our parishes now, particularly in America now, that they have to be this courageous in some way. And I think that's really a testament to the parish.
Yeah, and I thank God for them. They're still friends of ours, and we keep in touch with many of them. Some of the younger members have moved off. They've gotten jobs elsewhere. They've graduated from college. They have large families of their own, and it's so fun to see how they've grown over the years. But that merger had to be blessed by Metropolitan Philip because the Conciliar Press Publishing was a department of the Antiochian Archdiocese.
So it really wasn't as foreign as if, for example, if Moody's publishing arm came to you. I mean, this was kind of essentially, distant cousins coming together in a sense, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is. And you had in Father Peter and Deacon Michael knowledge of who I was and my background, and so they felt
an extraordinary talent in their own right.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
So we brought your friend and mine, Charles Agelat, into the picture, and he was the chancellor of the archdiocese at the time, and this is at the convention in Quebec, Antiochian Convention in 2008.
Can I put a pause there just for our other listeners? The first time I met Charles, and he said I was the chancellor. You have to understand my context here from a Greek Orthodox perspective. The chancellor is like the priest that's kind of the assistant to the hierarch and stuff like that.
Yes.
And I'm saying, so tell me again how you're a priest and you're a lawyer at the same time. And he goes, there's a lot about the Antiochian church you don't know. So this is one of them. So anyway, that's pretty funny.
Well, and he was such a gift to us, and he paved the way to get us an audience with Metropolitan Philip at the convention in 2008. And I can remember he said, we only have the opportunity when we have the opportunity. Just stay by my side.
Be ready. Yeah.
And so I just tracked him, and he would be walking behind the Metropolitan's entourage, and he'd say, Your Eminence, would you have time? I really want you to meet somebody. Not now, later. Yeah. And so finally we did get a chance to sit down with him, and he was very gracious. He didn't have a clue what I was doing.
Yeah. I mean, how could he?
No.
How could he have a clue? I mean, it's so foreign to...
But he trusted Charles. Yeah. And if Charles says that this is something we should do because it will advance the kingdom, it will help us evangelize. And nobody believed in evangelism more than Metropolitan Philip. I mean,
which is again, the right person at the right time.
Absolutely.
In the leadership sequence.
Absolutely.
Had it been somebody else, they might not have seen that broad vision and this opportunity, even if they don't understand it, but they need to get enough out of the way to say, if this can help, let's do it.
Yep. And our dear friends to this day, Father Thomas and Cordia Carla Zell, who were part of the founders of Conciliar Press, were there by our side at that convention. We went together, we hung out together, we prayed together for this meeting, that we would receive the blessing of the Metropolitan to come together in ministry. And we left the convention with that blessing. And in October of 2008, it became official that we were now part of Conciliar, renamed Conciliar Media Ministries, with Conciliar Press and Ancient Faith Radio. And a year later, the board asked if I would be the CEO of Conciliar Media Ministries, with our headquarters in Ben Lomond, California, and our radio headquarters in Chesterton, in reality in our upper bedroom.
In your house.
In our house. And that's how Conciliar and Ancient Faith Radio came together. Of course, a few years later, we changed the name to Ancient Faith Ministries and Ancient Faith Publishing in order to have a consistency in the brand, in the market.
Yeah. So what an amazing story. And I think, there's so many points of inflection here that anybody that's listening needs to understand that you can't always see. You can have a vision of what you would like to see, but you can't see all the steps in that vision always in advance. But if you'll start on the journey and you remain faithful to the journey and be patient and trust in the Holy Spirit, that in the fullness of time, the pathway will come. But then you have to be prepared to say yes. So you personally, John Maddex, was prepared to say yes. Tanya was prepared to say yes. Even His Eminence had to be prepared to say yes. Or none of this would have happened.
Yeah. And I mean, it just puts me in mind of the Theotokos, who said yes to the angel, who said, thou art highly favored. And she had to say yes. She could have said no. Yeah. But she didn't. She bravely said yes through her free will. And that's a model for all of us.
Right. And it's an inspiration. I mean, all kidding aside, we can look at it and say, okay, a lot of lucky things happen. This particular Metropolitan at this time, this individual who has a relationship, but okay, that's fine. Those are all there. But at the end of the day, you had to personally, you and Tanya personally had to say yes, because obviously you're making your home a studio, and you're doing something that was, while very familiar to you in the Moody context, was very foreign in the orthosphere. The notion of what you were doing in orthodoxy in America was like, huh? To this day, some people go, what? So that's a lot of yeses.
Yeah, and I didn't close the Moody loop only to say that I did retire from Moody in 2007. And so that retirement then gave me the time to develop Ancient Faith Radio even further, because I could do it during the day and not just in the evenings and on weekends. So.
Well, and I think the other part of that is, leaving the details of the story aside, chapters of our lives close, relationships change, geography changes, But ultimately, we can stay true to the values, whatever core values we have as individuals, and the why that we're pursuing in that regard.
Yeah.
And again, trusting the Lord that the experiences that He gave you are the experiences that you need to do what it is that you need to do. And so, the fact that the chapters close sometimes well and sometimes not so well is still the fact that God's got a big plan here, and you've got a part to play in that plan. And so that's how a 5-year-old kid who's, reading scripts from the KYB club becomes the CEO of this really global voice of orthodoxy. That's my phrase that I use to describe Ancient Faith Ministries, both, not only this humble offering through the live programming, but the podcasts and the books and the stories and the blogs and the everything else that's coming out. And you heard me when I interviewed Melinda, I'm into figuring out how, Ancient Faith Ministry becomes the next AI, the next artificial intelligence source. Yeah. So I'm just telling you, that's, you need to spend some brain cycles on that.
Yeah, when I hear that, I know it's time to retire.
No, I think it's just time. So here's the expression I use, Maddex, and I think you should use it too, that you don't retire, you refire.
Refire.
Okay? You refire.
All right.
You refire off in a new direction because, as we're going to get into in the next segment here, in my opinion, and I'm the expert in this now, in my humble opinion, you have far too many experiences of great value and far too many gifts to just sit there and clip coupons in, Chesterton, by God, Indiana. And for those of you that have never been to Chesterton, Indiana, you'll forgive me. I mean, Johnson, I think the president of the Chamber of Commerce, you ain't missing nothing, okay? I mean, it's a nice little town.
We love Chesterton.
It's a beautiful area. It's but it's not like it's Pasadena, California, or Miami, Florida. It's just a nice, quiet place. But you're the creator of the global voice of orthodoxy. So that voice needs.
Thank you, but Bill, this must be said, and because it is so vital to understand the establishment and the growth of Ancient Faith Ministries. We have been blessed with an amazing board, first of all, a volunteer board who,
critically important,
all of them to a person, get us. They understand our mission, and they support our mission. They cheer on our mission, and they are interested in evangelism and outreach. And you talk about people who say yes a lot. If we've got a good idea and it's going to cost a lot of money, none of us know where that money's coming from, but if it's the right thing to do, the answer has always been yes from them. But also think about, if you talked about the list of podcasts and therefore the contributors with Melinda the other night. Think about people like yourself, like Father Evan, like Jeannie Constantino. The list goes on and on and on. God has brought to us the cream of the crop of Orthodox communicators who up until now, or recent now, did not have an outlet.
Bingo.
I mean, in the evangelical church, if you're a pastor who has a decent message and a good communicator, it's not long before you got a radio show. And you're on daily, and now you have a following. But you think we have equally talented communicators who are gifted with the ability to share orthodoxy and to share the Christian faith who didn't have that outlet.
Correct.
And so my job was to open up an outlet for them so that they can shine, because we're nothing without them. There is no Ancient Faith Radio without Bill Marianis, Father Evan, Jeannie, Father Andrew. I mean, that's the truth. And thank God we have found people who get it, who know how to communicate well, who take risks, and are always ready to move to the next level. And our growth, to whatever extent we've enjoyed it, is the result of committed people, followers of Christ, who also said yes.
Well, I think that's a very well said summary. And I think it makes a couple of very important points, not the least of which is at different points in anyone's life, you will be asked. And if you have a gift, the answer has to be yes. It may be yes when, yes but, yes if I can do this, but you have to say yes. But the truth of the matter is, none of that is possible unless there is an architect. And just as, God is the architect of the universe, and our Lord and Savior is the architects of our lives, you really were the architect that saw a vision, and it evolved, but you saw a vision, and then you went about setting about to find and recruit those individuals that could make that vision a reality. And that is the sign of leadership. I know you don't like to hear it. I know you want to go to a commercial break right now, blah, blah, blah. I don't really give a flip. Yes, you are the CEO still, but you're soon to be a has-been. So I can abuse you a little bit more to say, in the context of it, had you not had the vision and the courage to say yes a lot of times along the way, and then inspire others to catch that vision. See, that's why a vision statement, and my way of doing strategic planning, has to be visible. I have to be able to see where this ministry will be in a year or 2 or 3, whatever the case may be, as opposed to those things that are ethereal out there, what I would call your why statement. And I think you've captured and communicated more effectively than anybody a consensus vision about where this is going to go, and as it evolved. As we were talking about with Melinda, to have stations that are multilingual, to have music that's separate from this, to be able to do podcasts and blogs and stuff like that. And now the expansion in video and things of that nature. And then eventually AI, I can't wait for AFMI AI. So, I don't know what that's going to look like, but you need to start thinking about that. So, all right, I do want to give you another chance for a little break here,
Yep.
But I have one more question
Sure.
that I want to get to before I let you have a breather here. I do refer to you frequently as Gentleman John, but and truthfully, because I think you are one of the nicest and kindest people and one of the best professionals I've ever had the privilege of working with. But the world in which you operate is kind of a very treacherous series of ponds. And so, the way I kind of envision it is there's this dog-eat-dog media pond of all the different media outlets. There's the pan-Orthodox pond, which certainly has its own challenges, and we're experiencing some of them in this very moment in time, and we will get over these, and then there'll be some other ones coming down the road, right? And then there's the increasingly, at least globally, and certainly in the United States, increasingly anti-Christian pond that we're starting to see happen. So tell me a little bit about these, and I may have missed one or two that you have to traverse on a basis in leading this organization. How do you do that? How do you get through these troubled waters with such grace and dignity? And I think it's important for you to say that so that other people who are facing their own treacherous ponds, whatever they may be, can also see a path forward.
Yeah, that's a very insightful question. And I'm not sure I have the best answer to it, other than to say those minefields will always be there. You can't avoid them. If you're going to do any work that's worthwhile, the enemy is going to plant minefields and hope that you step on them. And we've stepped on a few, even as part of Ancient Faith. There are things in our history that I look back on and say, that was a mistake. That, let's learn from that, but I wish we hadn't done that. And here, the minefield that I am, frankly, the most worried about is a minefield that doesn't have to be there. And it is the minefield of social media. And what I have seen happen within the Orthodox Church in the last 10 years, I can only equate it to road rage, where that person that you are attacking on the internet, you'll never meet, you've never met, but it's convenient for you to attack because you're behind the wheel of your car with the windows up.
Yeah.
And I fear that the enemy is gaining a foothold into dividing the church, Christ Church, through comments and fighting on the internet. I personally will not engage on social media, on Facebook.
You are once again very wise.
People can say what they want. They can assume what they want, even if I know it's untrue. I just know it's always going to be a mistake to engage. And I wish we would all take a step back, take a breath before we hit the send button on some of our vitriol, some of our just vicious attacks on each other as not only just Christians, but as Orthodox Christians, as fellow members of the body of Christ, to rather give the benefit of the doubt, believe the best about the other person. There's a story that you don't know. And to make the assumptions and to attack, I really fear that this could devolve into something none of us want. And it's avoidable. If we would spend more time loving each other and assuming the best about each other, and less time assuming the worst and just looking for ways to turn an innocent comment into a fight.
So this is a great point, and that's another whole pond that we didn't even talk about, right? Or I didn't even mention in that. So from your wizened and experienced perspective, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, look, I'll confess that I'm one of those with a sharp tongue and with a quick mouse. Right. But we all have been in different points, in different circumstances, in different ways, or with different triggers. I mean, there's certainly, I know some of the most pious and quiet and just innocent, wonderful human beings, but there's one issue about which they can go to which one's higher, DEFCON 1 or DEFCON 5? DEFCON 1? They go to whichever is the highest of those, like, from zero to nothing. And so how do you do that, John? Give us some guidance, oh wise man.
Oh, I don't know that I have the answer. I struggle.
Well, how do you do it?
It is a personal, individual struggle because I'm not immune. I get that feeling of anger, and I get red in the face, and I see something that someone will say, maybe about ancient faith, that I know is unfair and untrue, and I want to defend. And
the fight or flight response.
Exactly. And the minute I give way to that, there is no winner. It is going to be a double loss in every single case. You're never going to convince someone else on the internet that they are wrong and you are right. So why engage? What have you gained by engaging?
Yeah, so that's the fundamental root question, right? So in other words, what is the objective of your antagonism, right? What do you hope to accomplish?
What's the end goal?
And then when you actually think your way through that, ask the second question of, do you think you actually will be able to accomplish? Can you persuade that person or that group out there and stuff like that?
Yeah.
And then if the answer is no, then I think then to walk away. So now here's the lawyer in me, right? We are currently now on an increasing level engaging, and by we I mean, the Orthodox communities in America, in picking and choosing, but we're picking cases, judicial cases, in which there are stakes that we think are important to maintain, and actually fighting that fight. Now, the consequence of that is it's one thing to do it in the courts because, there's a whole process, there's a set of rules, even adversaries, and this is, people who aren't lawyers don't get this, but even vicious adversaries, in the sense, by vicious, I mean hard arguing adversaries, can shake hands and walk out of the courtroom and be good friends and things of that nature. And yet, by virtue of taking those positions, whether in our case in the litigation, in other people's cases, I mean, in marching, the March for Life is a good example of that.
Yeah.
There are those things about which either you personally or we as a church feel strongly, and yet we know that the minute we step into that minefield and step out of our comfort zone, you're right, that uncontrollable rage is going to come back at us. So how do we reconcile this, John?
Love.
I love it.
Yeah.
God, go further, deeper.
Yeah.
Come on, spread that message.
This
is the John 13:34-35 moment, by the way, for those of you that are keeping track at home.
Yeah. Hebrews 10:24 says, "Let us therefore stir one another along to good works, and so much more as you see the day approaching."
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, let us therefore stir one another along to good works, and so much more as the day is approaching, the day of Christ, the day of his return.
Right.
In light of the return of Christ, at whatever time, I used to be a dispensationalist and I thought I had it all figured out.
You had the date circled on your calendar.
That's right. So knowing that he's returning, knowing God's call through Christ to love one another with the love with which he's loved us, that's the first thing we have got to think about before we open our mouths, before we engage, before we write that comment. Is this coming from a heart of love or a heart of revenge or a heart of anger? If it is, go offline. Stop. Take a walk. Get a cup of coffee.
Or as I say, go ahead and write it. Just don't hit send.
Just don't hit send.
I mean, I got a whole folder full of those messages. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, I do hit send, but frequently. But I got a whole bunch more that didn't get sent. So,
I'm sure. And
go ahead and write it.
Yeah.
Get it out of your system. And like you say, go take a walk. And get a cup of coffee.
And I've composed a few of those myself. And
I don't believe it.
And,
I don't believe it.
No, you can believe it.
I don't. You're too nice a guy.
But God help us that we don't get so engulfed in our own opinions and our own presuppositions that we cannot see the other side. I mean, someone once said, you cannot slice bread so thin that there aren't two sides. There's always another side. And the argument that the other person is making makes sense to them. Doesn't make sense to you.
Right.
But it makes sense to them. And they have come to that conclusion for a reason. And so do we immediately write them off as evil, as uneducated, as ignorant?
Absolutely we should.
Yes. Or do we listen more and talk less? And I think the model that we have been given by the fathers of the church is to listen more and talk less, is to be more loving in our responses, more patient and kind, and to answer a harsh word with a loving word, to return anger with kindness. This is the heart of Christ. And yeah, he ran people out of the church, the money changers. I hear all of that. But if you want to know what the heart of Christ is, it's the one who said, you who are without sin, cast the first stone.
Yeah.
So if we want to be like Christ, if we're serious about it, then put the pen down for a bit. Stop hitting enter for a little bit and start thinking about that other person across the Ethernet's world as someone for whom Christ died, someone who loves them more than you could ever possibly love, and who have a family often, and who have children, and who go home at night to maybe something that's dreadful, maybe cancer in their family, maybe a lost loved one. And maybe the reason they're so angry is because of something they've experienced in their life that they don't understand. And so the only way they know how to express it, to vent, is in anger or in, difficult conversation. So it's a struggle for me, as it is for everyone else. But I just fear, and if there's one thing I want to leave as my challenge to people, is come on, folks, we can do better. Stop it. Quit fighting on the internet. You're not winning, and you'll never win.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have just heard the best homily you will probably hear in a very, very long time from someone who has the perspective and the experience and the truth to say that. And as we hearken back to what John said early on, when he was confronted with the reality of orthodoxy as the truth and the Eucharist as truly being the body and blood of Christ. When you have the truth and you know the truth, and John has just spoken the truth, how can we go back? And so we're going to leave you with that thought. We're going to take another short break right now. And when we return, I'm going to finalize the conversation with Platinum Tongue, and you heard why, gentleman John Maddex. as we talk about the next future phase, both for him and Tanya and for Ancient Faith Ministries. So we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back.
Bill will be right back, but please remember that this show is pre-recorded, so we are unable to take your calls. If you have any questions or want any further information, you can email Bill at stewardshipcalling.com.
Do you know that Ancient Faith Radio is entirely listener-supported? Hi, I'm Bobby Maddex, station manager of AFR, and you heard me right. All of those podcasts you love, the live shows, the conferences, the audio documentaries, and the videos, they only exist because of listeners like you who took the time and minimal effort required to send us $5 here, $10 there, even $100 on occasion, or sometimes more. That's how this ministry operates, in partnership with you, the AFR listener. Without these donations, both big and small, it is no exaggeration to say that there would be no Ancient Faith Radio. No Lord of Spirits or Live with the Lows, no Saint of the Day or Daily Orthodox Scriptures, no Father Thomas Hopko or Father Evan Armitage or Dr. Jeannie Constantinou. There would just be silence. Let's never let this happen, shall we? Together, let's continue to sustain AFR and even perhaps expand its offerings with contributions of any amount. Simply go to ancientfaith.com and click on Donate in the upper right-hand corner. Be a participant. Be a partner. Become a donor. Join those who make Ancient Faith Radio possible. Thanks in advance for your generosity.
Stewardship Calling is back, and we are ready for your call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Bill Marianis.
So welcome back to Stewardship Calling in our first Wednesday program here in December 7th, the last of this year and the last of a very important experience of leadership that has been a role model for so many people, that has made the platform that you're listening to right now and all the other value that you get out of the Ancient Faith Ministry platforms, multiple, that's S, platforms, possible. And I'm interviewing, of course, our leader, our visionary chief, the lover extraordinaire from his last homily that he just delivered, that is so powerful that we're going to capture, and we're going to get Matushka to just cut out that whole portion, and we're just going to repeat that on a channel for like 24 hours a day, particularly through the election cycle. I got to tell you, I'm having a lot of trouble getting through this election cycle. And so we need to get that message that you just delivered on a separate Ancient Faith Radio channel, 24 hours a day through at least the election cycle, because it never ends. I mean, this program is in December, but they're already starting the campaign for the next election cycle and the next run, and then the presidency, and then the blah 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 blah. And there's something else, and if you follow global politics, oh my Lord, it's just your head can explode when you put that all in perspective. One last comment, and then I'm going to get you back down to the real life. There's an amazing book that I'm in the kind of middle of. A friend of mine recommended to me called "The End of the World is Just the Beginning," and it really is the most. I love facts and figures and statistics and stuff like that. So it's the most demographically and scientifically researched book I have ever read that predicts what's going to happen globally in a very, very different world that we're getting ready to face in the coming years, because of all the things that they cover, that Zan covers in that book, which I don't want to get into here. But that's a juxtaposition for the final segment here, and that is, look, I did M&A law, bought and sold companies for 36 years, and I know that one of the most challenging moments is when you sit with a founder of a business who's getting ready to sell it or have a new leader take it over, and there's so much going through their minds. There's all the decades of building this that are being replayed, the visions that are being replayed in their minds, and there's the things that they wish they did and they didn't do, and the things they can see now, and yet at the same time they know that they need to breathe, they need to relax, they need to take some time off, and they need to hand the baton off. So if you don't mind being vulnerable, and you are very gracious at doing that, if you don't mind being vulnerable for a second, as you contemplate turning the page of the blessed book of your life and the blessed book of Ancient Faith Ministries over, what's going through your head right now, John?
Well, thank you, Bill. I didn't expect to feel as positive as I am feeling that this is the time. I can remember thinking about retirement down, 5 years ago and thinking, oh, I can't imagine. I don't want to give up. I am having too much fun to stop this.
Yeah, just like what Melinda said in her interview. I just have so much fun with Ancient Faith Ministries. I don't want to give it up. Yeah.
It's great. But something changed. And I would say that changed probably about a year ago.
Okay.
Where I had just turned 72 in March of last year.
A young 72, I might add. Well, you're healthier and more fit at 72, certainly than I am at 67, but a lot of other people that I know that are younger. So you've done a good job of taking care of yourself.
Well, so and my long-suffering wife has been by my side faithfully this whole time. I could not have done really any of this without her encouragement and literally hard work. Absolutely. She was Ancient Faith Radio in those early days while I was doing my full-time job. And so I look at her, I look at this point in our life, I look at where Ancient Faith is at this point, and something clicked. And I told Tanya, it's time. And I have no doubt about it. I don't have any second guesses or misgivings about it. It is time. I feel like the best years are ahead for Ancient Faith Ministries, but not with my leadership. It will be under the very capable leadership of Melinda Johnson, who is a visionary, who gets Ancient Faith as well as Tanya and Bobby and me and Molly ever did.
Yeah.
And she can articulate the mission and get you excited about the mission better than anybody else I know. And so knowing that we have someone as capable as Melinda who gets us, who knows where we're going, and will take us to the next level. We have so much more to do. We're just scratching the surface on what's possible here, but it can't happen with me. It can happen with new eyes, with new strength, with new vision and excitement. And she brings that. And that's what gives me the confidence. We have an executive leadership team as well as a board, which is as fine a group of individuals as live on the planet. They are committed Orthodox Christians who love Christ, love his church, love this ministry, and will shepherd it into the future far better than I could ever do. And that is just God's honest truth. The best years are ahead under our new leader. Our executive leadership team, which is Bobby, my son, who is the digital media manager, still overseeing the radio and the Ancient Faith Kids and the blogs and other digital ministries. Our chief content officer, Father Andrew Damick, our business manager, Nancy Chalakovich, our publishing manager, Donna Jean Ryan, our stewardship and director of donor communications, Jerry Manetos, and then, of course, Melinda, who will advance now from being the communications director to the CEO, along with our board and 2 new members of the board who just recently joined. This ministry is ready. We've just gone through a good, professional, independent audit. We have a brand new app. We are at a peak right now with the Chinese and Spanish language divisions, with 14 to 16 books a year, with our blogs, with our podcasts, with donations. Now is the time to take the hat off and to allow younger, energetic, visionary people like the ones we have to take it to the next level. And I could not be more pleased and more ready to move on to this next chapter. I know Tanya is certainly ready, and we are excited about this next phase. Bill, we're recording this in late October, and in 2 weeks, which will be in November 11th or 12th, Tanya and I will be flying to Tirana, Albania.
Wow.
To work with OCMC missionary Nathan and Gabriella Hoppy, along with the station manager of the Tirana Full Power FM station, Father Gregory, and Archbishop Anastasios, who started the station, to help them in their work of advancing the mission, advancing the cause of Christ through terrestrial full power FM radio. So I'll be working with their staff. Exactly.
Yeah.
Working with the staff, working with the OCMC missionaries there, and we'll be there for 10 days. That's the type of thing that I'm excited about being able to do now. And frankly, we bought a camper. We're going to be doing some RVing. And, yep.
Big news, folks.
Old dog, new tricks.
Hey, man, listen. So here's the thing. We need to create a website for you. We need a Where's John and Tanya website, right, where we can kind of track your progress and see where you're going. And then what'll happen is we're going to have Ancient Faith Radio and Ancient Faith Ministry faithful greet you and meet you and treat you, and I think this is like a victory tour, how like famous athletes will, play their final game in multiple cities and they always honor them and stuff like that. So
difference there is that
coming soon to a trailer park near you, right. John and Tanya Maddex.
Yeah. When those famous athletes show up for their victory tour, people are going to show up. This one, not so much. So.
Are you kidding me? Let me tell you something. Look, this, and all kidding aside, I mean, you and I have a lot of fun together, and that's one of the things I really appreciate. But the absolute truth of the matter is, I don't even see the peak of the mountaintop of people who come and tell me how grateful or how much of an impact something that they heard through or read about or read from Ancient Faith Ministries was. You see it all day, every day. I'm sure you get hundreds of emails all over the place from all the different outlets that you do. So full well that, creating the global voice of Orthodoxy is having its impact in that regard. And you also know that if we did do a Where's John and Tanya website, that we would have, we may not get the same size of crowds as some of the politicians, but we would get a much better, more faithful, more loving crowd, than some of those. Plus, it'd be a lot of fun. I mean, I think people should get to know you. I mean, we have selfishly kept our knowledge of you, but I think we need to get you out in the streets.
Anybody that wants to meet with us around the fire pit next to our camper are welcome to join us. Bring your own hot dogs.
Okay, but you need to tell us where you're going to be and when you're going to be there. You don't have to give us enough head notice here. I mean, because you need to have spontaneity in your lives right now. But I do think that I think this is, we're onto something. So I need to get Bobby going on this, because we're going to have to put like a geolocator on you or something like that, so we can actually track your progress after you get back from Albania.
Put something in my hat. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. So, look, what to me was great in hearing what you said, and what I hope will inspire listeners, is that after an extraordinary journey and career, which you've been most gracious in sharing the details of, I should say, it ain't over for you. Here you are going back to your roots, to Albania, which I bet most people can't even find on the map, to actually do the work that you are uniquely qualified to do. And I just think that if there is not a better example of a stewardship calling being lived, or if there is one, I don't know it. This is it, dude. I mean, I'm just saying.
Well, thanks be to God.
So what's going to happen after that? So we've got Albania, we've got the Where's John and Tanya,
and we have 8 grandchildren, all of whom are in different stages of life. We have some coming up through the school system playing sports, baseball, football, volleyball, acting, choir, show choir. So we're showing up. Every single one will be there.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, that is the richness of a family. And sometimes, John, I know you appreciate this because you've always been focused on your family and stuff like that. But I will remember as till the day I die, that at my mom's funeral, my daughters, kind of gave a little homily about what they remember about their yaya. And, my eldest daughter talked about how the fact that no matter what sport she played, because she's played 4 different sports, her yaya was always in the stands, was always watching, was always just like that. So you are giving them a gift that is precious in your presence as well as in the interactions that you'll have with them.
Yeah,
so.
We love it. We can't get enough of it.
So wait, do you do any coaching from the stands? Because you're a jock, so how do you keep from coaching from the stands?
Well, a lot of things that you don't say because our job is encouragement.
And love and support.
Better, next one will be better.
Yeah. No, there's always that's a different kind of coaching. I think that's absolutely wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. Now, let me just kind of finish up here, just kind of give you some freedom here. But, you've had the most amazing seat in some respects of orthodoxy for a long period of time. So, Mr. Wizard of Oz, what do you see in your crystal ball happening with regard to orthodoxy, either in America or globally, or kind of what's next on the horizon?
Well, I guess I'm just simple enough to believe that the Holy Spirit is driving people to the church. He is showing the shallowness of many people's faith, and the entertainment-based worship, and missing out on this pearl of great price. And I know of so many people who don't know what to do. They love Christ. They want to be involved. They want to be faithful, but they're discouraged in what's happening because it's like make it up as you go along. And there is such a hunger for the rootedness and the depth of the Orthodox faith and the historical, beautiful, as I say, golden thread that links us all the way back to the apostles. There is a hunger for that. And I think that the Holy Spirit is drawing people to his church in many different ways. And I think we can expect to see that to continue.
So there is in your message and in your heart optimism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've got to be.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, you don't have to be, but it's a free will choice like everything else is, right?
But if we're not, are we not doubting the Holy Spirit? Are we not saying that, well, apparently you're not able to,
you're not the real
to
deal.
get past this. You're not real.
Right. Yeah. No, I think, and that's really the message here. I mean, for you to share that with everybody, I think is really powerful. Given everything you've seen and everything you've been through and stuff like that, is that, the question I ask every church is, do you believe Jesus Christ is who he says he is?
Yeah.
And if you answer that question, yes, then your life has to change.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just, because otherwise you're not living an authentic life.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're just not. Right. And so you are the personification of this program and this ministry, the notion of living a stewardship calling, of finding out the gifts, talents, and abilities that God gave you, and then living them to the fullest. As St. John Chrysostom said, in how we develop others, but in your case, how you develop yourself, living them to the full and continuing to do that in that regard. And so I just think there is no better example from now on. When people ask me, how do you live your stewardship calling? I'm just going to point a picture of the platinum tongue one. And so I need a good publicity picture for you. Right?
Well, but always think of the models that I was given. I mean, people modeled for me in many, many different ways, from my father to other people that God brought into our lives that I still emulate and parrot in just everyday conversations.
Well, look, you did it in this program. I mean, the names that you named were intentional. I know you didn't do that to drop names. You did that because that was your way of paying respect to them. That was your way of saying thank you to them because of the significant role that they played in your life. And so this is, when we talk about, in the Orthodox tradition, it's so oftentimes when people pass the kingdom eternal, we say, may their memory be eternal. Well, part of the way we make their memory eternal is what you've just done by giving them honor and dignity and the influence they've had on your life. But part of the way we make them eternal is by living the message that they taught us and by inspiring others to do the same thing and then passing it on to the next generation, all of which, every one of those examples of which are exactly what you are doing right now in this moment. You're paying homage to them. You're respecting them by virtue of the gifts you gave. You're developing that next generation, and you're passing the baton on. So, you have defined perfect leadership and perfect Christian leadership all in one.
You're kind by God's grace.
No, I'm not kind. I just, me, man. I am not kind. I'm a horrible human being.
Okay, that's true.
That's the way it is. All right. I always give the guests the last say before we sign off. So, John, you've been so gracious with your time, but if there's anything else you want to say or get off your chest or correct, which is I'm sure not the case, but this is your moment, my brother.
It's so simple. Just thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you to everyone who has donated, who has read books, who has shared this ministry with other people. Thank you to the podcasters, to the authors. Huge thank you to the staff and to our board. Huge thank you to my family who have stood by me, to friends like you who have encouraged. I am just full of thanksgiving, and that's the only way I could end this.
Well, it could not have ended on a more positive tone. The two messages that you delivered at the end is love and thanks. And, if there was anything that personifies our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, it's love and thanks. And if there's anything that is symbolic of the values that have been created, that you have put in yourself, you and Tanya have breathed life into Ancient Faith Ministries and all the things that it does and all the people that it touches and all the impact that it has had and will have in the future, that will always be those examples of love and thanks. And so it is we who can't love you enough and can't thank you enough, which is why I want the John and Tanya tour to go on the road here. But in all sincerity, John, you have been a role model and a mentor, not only to me, but to so many other people that I hear all the time. And your patience and your love and your caring and your wise counsel and your wisdom and all the characteristics. My brothers and sisters, if you ever have the chance to meet in person John Maddex and sit down and break bread with him and just talk with him as we've tried to do here, you will be giving yourself the greatest gift. And at the end of the day, you will be saying what I am so inadequately saying on behalf of so many people globally, that you have touched with the global voice of orthodoxy. You've created Ancient Faith Ministries. It is we, my brother, who thank you.
Well, and we can all say with the psalmist, this is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes.
And all I can say then is, amen. Well, that is beyond all the time that we have here. And I have abused my friend John Maddex, who has abused so many other people by calling them to service and abusing them in the perfect way which they're called to do by asking them so many questions. But I think hopefully you've gotten some insights into the platinum tongue wonder who has made everything happen with his life partner and with his family, so invested in this ministry. And I hope that you will look at this and say, well, what can I do? And in the short run, you can certainly listen to the content and buy the books and contribute to the ministry. But there's more that you can do. And I'm hoping that what this will do is be a catalyst for you to make Ancient Faith Ministries part of your family and part of your calling and part of your ministry and part of what you do. And I certainly will hope that you will add them to the list of generosity that you will invest in, because, not only we're doing it because John inspired us to do it, but because at the end of the day, we are bringing people closer to Christ and each other. So a big shout out of thanks and a debt of gratitude that I can never possibly repay to the man who hoodwinked me into all of this in the first place, the platinum tongue one himself, gentleman John, and his beautiful wife Tanya, and the rest of the Maddex family. I always have to give a shout out of thanks to another one of the people that John trained so well, Matushka Trudy Richter, who's our show producer, and now that we're calling beautiful Chesterton, Indiana, and all the great team that makes Ancient Faith Radio possible through the generosity of your donations and your participation. And we hope that these Stewardship Calling First Wednesday and Fifth Sunday programs have been informative and useful to you in some way. This is the end of the road for the year in terms of broadcasting, thank God, in many ways, for everything, honestly. But if you have any questions, or if you have any comments, or if you have any ideas, please feel free to reach out to me at bill@stewardshipcalling.com or tag me on my website. Folks, that's it for 2022. Who knows what the future holds for each of us and any of us, but regardless, I honestly, from sincerely and on behalf of all of the Ancient Faith family, wish you well, and that you have a joyous Christmas and holiday season with the ones that you love, and an even healthier and more joyous new year as we all work to bring people closer to Christ and each other. As I said at the outset, and as I say at the end of every program, that two of the most important days of your life are, first, the day you were born, and second, the day you figure out why. And this program has hopefully let you understand that when someone as incredible as John and Tanya Maddex figure out their why, the Lord will make open the gates of heaven and everything possible for them to achieve that because of the righteousness of what they're doing. And I hope that your lives are equally as blessed with the righteous and fulfilling why. So I thank you for listening. I ask God to bless each and every one of you. And as always, I pray that you SOTPAETJ, which stands for stay on the path, capital T, capital P, and enjoy the journey. Good night. God bless. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. And a blessed life to all. Thank you, John. And thank you.
Glory to Jesus Christ. Glory forever. You're listening to AncientFaithRadio.com.
Are you thankful for the Orthodox Study Bible? If so, you might be interested in St. Athanasius Academy, the same organization that produced the Orthodox Study Bible. St. Athanasius Academy is fully online and offers college courses and homeschool studies. Learn more at www.